Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Whining On. My name is Matt Bowden, the Encourage Rogue, and today I'm with the fabulous Dom Ferry. Dom, please say a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Matt. Hello, world. My name's Dom, and I'm coming to you all the way from northern New South Wales on the coast, the eastern coast of Australia. A little bit about myself. For 25 years, I was a circle act. About 25 years. 10 of them were in a double act. I've actually been on the streets for the first time in my life. It was when I was 16, but I completely forgot about it and rediscovered it way later. I've been living mobile existences for a long time. I've been in love with the gypsy world and the street world, and now I do it very differently. Instead of being running around at 1,000,000 miles an hour and quoting 1,000,000 lines and threatening people's lives, it's just a far more gentle. Hey, I play for the soul and see if my notes will attract an emotional connection, which is ultimately what we're all after.
So you become a musician then in your later days?
Yeah, although I started it as a kid, as many do, but I left it behind for 30 years and didn't hardly touch the instrument at all. And then when I realized that it was time, the world was changing, 9/11 had just happened, all this stuff, you could sense that it was going to get trickier and trickier to traps around the world with a suitcase full of weird objects and strange forms of currency and weird looking person with brown skin, all that starts to add up and you go, okay, what if I stopped the knives and the machetes and the whips and all the rest of it? What could I replace it with? And it took a while, but suddenly, the first love I ever had of an instrument, of a culture, of a way of expression came back and went, yeah, hell, follow that, and it's been good to me since. Yeah, it's very.
Let's start at the beginning, Dom. So, how did you begin in this life? Why become a street entertainer?
I came to it really kind of differently. I grew up, for the most part, in New Zealand, and New Zealand has two, cities, if you could call them that, by London and Paris standards. They're tiny, but you have Auckland and you have, to a lesser degree, Wellington. But there was no street theatre per se when I grew up as a kid. I never saw a busker in the streets of New Zealand, other than the odd muso. It wasn't something that was ever on my radar, and I decided through circumstances to follow the mobile world and build a house truck. And for the first couple of years, you get caught up in the creation of this mobile bubble that you've got. And then once you start traveling on the highways, you start to wonder, oh shit, how am I going to put fuel in the tank and groceries on the table? And
can I just ask you, just before you go, why go for a traveling lifestyle? If you've grown up in a house and if you've grown up being a kind of grounded person, why would you make such a radical change?
It was really radical, yeah. I think part of it was inside me. Also, there was a desire to get out of the city, to be free, to rediscover yourself in an environment, to create something with your own hands, which was what basically building a mobile life was. You created something, even though I had no formal apprenticeship as a carpenter, but I was one at the end after building a couple of trucks, and worked as such for a while when I could. A lot of different reasons. I fell in love with the love of my life. We're still together, and she'd been living in vans, so I'm pretty sure a lot of it was on hey, let's do this. Let's get out of the big city. A friend of mine had just done it, and I looked at what he'd created, and I thought, wow. And seeing that was the light bulb moment. We have them in life, and you go, that's completely different. That's off the planet, and I could do that. And so, in essence, I did. And once you get over the exhilaration of it's driving, we're going, everything's in the back, the windows haven't fallen off yet, it's all good. Then the reality of, okay, I'm living on the side of the road now, not in a rental house. There's no support mechanism. How do I make this work? And initially you follow the paths that, you know, the gypsies did for years, which is seasonal fruit picking, you know, laboring, odd jobs, whatever. And then once it started to grow as a movement, we started to travel as groups, we started to draw attention to ourselves. And suddenly it dawned on us that we were getting a lot of negative attention because nobody knew who we were, what we were. It was a little freaky, these guys all turning up and living in a public park. If we call ourselves something, a roadshow, a public library, the Permaculture Association, whatever, people are going to go, oh, that's what they are. Oh, great, we welcome you. And so suddenly the concept of doing something for people came
And
into
so
our
this
minds.
was, by the sounds of it, this was, as a community, you were trying to figure out a way that you could integrate in some way.
Yeah, and not get harassed, essentially.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you have, it's like, it's a numbers game. Always, everything is a numbers game. And if you have one house truck or one wagon, one Vardo, one boat parked up on a river, everybody walks past, goes, oh, isn't that lovely? I wish I could live like you. If I win the golden lotto tomorrow, I will do that. And then 2, still cute. 3, uh-oh. 5, is it a gang? Are they going to rob and steal our daughters? You know, all of that comes into it. I mean, and suddenly the whole traveller thing that you probably know a little bit about gets into play, and where residents, they're on the road, suddenly I'm missing a chicken. You know,
Can you give me a date for this? A sort of ballpark figure in the years where
yeah,
you are now?
built the first truck in 1979.
Right.
So at that stage, New Zealand was still only 3 million people. It's you know, three-quarters of the size of Great Britain, and yet on 2 islands. And yet at that stage, Great Britain would have been about 50 million people, and we were 3. So there's a lot of room, and there's a lot of empty roads, and there's a lot of big farms, and there's a lot of places where you can quietly park up. And the other thing is, we hadn't had the European thing. I mean, the Gypsies turned up, or the first Romani tribes recorded outside of Paris were in the 1400s. And Paris was a city of about 15,000 maybe at that stage. And the Romani camp outside the gates was about 4,000 people. So it was a serious freak out to them. They were like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
all these different looking people, full of life, beautiful women, wanting to come in and, hey, let me do this. Hey, I have this. Hey, can we share? And all this stuff. And, you know, that's when all of a sudden the walls started to go up against the traveller.
Well, I've
And
written an
it's been
article
like,
about it.
yeah,
Fascinating, you know.
yeah, me too. I mean,
Apparently,
you've lived it too, in that sense that as soon as you're no longer sedentary, the world looks at you in a very different way. Much
but
as
even
we
just look
were
at
in
the
buskers as well. I mean, because
yes,
of that mobile connection. I mean, buskers move. You know, sure, some of us have you know, developed homes and lived in cities for years and years and stuff. But essentially, the essence of the craft, like circus, was you can't keep doing the same show to the same people all the time. You got to keep the thing rolling on the highway, otherwise, everybody's seen it and they won't pay you, and they won't come to the show. You know, and in essence, that was you know, the growth of circus. Circus started to move because they realized that they couldn't, you know, you spent 10 years learning how to walk a cable and do the tricks that you've done on the cable. You can't go home and spend another 10 years learning a new side of things on no income. So yeah, mobile living. And from mobile living, Partly the festivals. The early '80s in New Zealand was our Woodstocks. Um, we had two major festivals um, that ran. One of them ran for 4 summers in a row, and the other ran for 3. Uh, and all of a sudden, if you were on the road, living in a funky home, and you're obviously good with your hands because you built the thing, um, they went, yeah, come and park up on site for 3 months beforehand and help us build our toilets, put in our plumbing, figure out where the caravans and the campers are going to go, build the main stage, all the rest of it. And so suddenly it was an income. We would spend 3 months of the year on a festival site, and through that, um, me and everyone else got realized, fringe, circus, street theatre to a certain degree started to creep in. And we suddenly started to realize that there's such a thing as a juggler. Wow. There's such
And
a
that's
thing as
because you see people. Is that because you saw people traveling from Europe bringing this stuff to New Zealand?
partly, yeah. I mean, the first street performer I ever saw in New Zealand was Swiss. His name was Rene. He's a lovely bloke. He lives in Queenstown now. But he was known as Rene the Traveling Gypsy, even though he looked like a surfer. And he bought, heavily influenced by California style street show to New Zealand. And that day, because at that stage, we were already in the process of trying to figure out how it was going to work on the street.
And so, what was this show like then? Can you just describe his show a
His
little bit?
show,
Give people a sense. Yeah.
highly mobile, not huge circle, nothing like the large piazza stuff, because Rene was on the move all the time, and he did it to pay for his lifestyle. Involved fire eating, few magic tricks, certain amount of juggling, in a non-stop patter, constantly. Watch the third ball; it's going under the arm. Watch the fourth ball; it's over here now. Um, and with a line a second, all of a sudden, you were listening. My first, my first hearing of those classic one-liners. That there's a book of them, and we all use them heavily. But it was more the energy. Ultimately, it was that energy that was sort of like, I'm really good at this. I'm going to go out here. I'm going to clap my fingers. You're going to stop. I'm going to do this. You're going to give me your money. And we all live happily ever after. And it was that energy that none of us had seen in that part of the world, because we were still trying to, okay, how about this way of drawing, of drawing a crowd? Okay, how about that way? We'd just done a clown school. There was a gentleman called Alan Clay who'd been with Trunk Fools. Trunk Fools was Django's mob in traveling through Holland and Belgium and parts of France. And Alan had been a part of that, along with River and a few of the others, and they came to New Zealand. And Alan was full of the clown, the concept of and started a clown school in Auckland. That's where I met Martin. We were talking about Martin Ewan before. Martin and I were part of that first clown school. And
Wow. And what year was that then? 83, that sort of time?
That was 84. That was 83 it was 83, yeah. And Alan put on his clown school. So we were doing exercises in downtown Auckland. How do we, one day we'd all get on the bus with clown noses on. All of us. Didn't have clown characters per se, didn't know a lot about that. But the exercise of that day was to go downtown and with this thing on your nose, see how people react, play with people, get used to the attention that you're going to have with this on. The next day, go out and become statues. Freeze. Hold the pose for 10 minutes and watch people's attention, and then break it. Do it in as a duo. One leads, goes up, freezes. The other goes up towards him or her, adopts a pose that is in harmony with what they're doing, and so you carry on the game up the street. No attempts to draw a crowd,
And
but
what was it?
simply
What was the experience like for you doing that? The personal
um,
experience, the thoughts you had, the
I'd
feelings you
never
had.
had a theatrical. I came from a completely non-theatrical background. Although I'd been on stage at the age of 8 with a French touring company, and they needed someone to play a page, a squire, and my mum volunteered me. So all of a sudden, I found myself for 4 nights on that week on a spotlight, on a stage, in front of an audience with a very well-known French theatre company, and this old guy who would, hold my head and go, a soliloquy like you'd see in Shakespeare. And I remember that glow of the lights. I remember the attention. I remember all of that. The first time I actually peed my pants, I was that freaked out by it all. And then the second time, I got used to it. And then by the fourth time, I was starting to really enjoy it, relish it. Little memories like that. But I had no theatrical training. I was good at it. I had a knack for it. When there were school plays at high school, I'd volunteer for it. And I figured out that clowning was my way of survival in tough schools, where there were gangs in my schools and a certain amount of daily, you know, schoolyard bullying and violence. My way out of all of that was to be the idiot, was to be the funny guy. You know. I would preach. I had a religion at the age of 13. I would stand on a rubbish bin and go, "The Church of Dom has just opened," or whatever it was. I have no idea what I was saying at the time. And, today we venerate the sin of drinking. Thou shalt drink lots. And everybody would laugh and think it was cute and funny. And so already I had an inkling of going down that path. But because it wasn't Europe and there wasn't, walking through Covent Garden and going, wow, that exists, or walking through Pompidou, or wow, that exists. There was none of that. We had to kind of create it for ourselves. So the festivals gave us a taste of the fact that there were circus skills you could learn, there was street theatre you could do, and
So
then
what was the experience of you doing a clown course then? So you've had your young experience on stage and you've discovered as you're growing up, perhaps not at that time consciously, but now obviously very much consciously, that you were a clown, that you use clown as defense mechanism. And then you find yourself in these workshops in public, which I think quite nice about these workshops is the fact that it seems like it's all looking at people's responses and you're learning the way people's attention works in public.
yep,
What's the
totally.
experiences of that like?
It was a more gentle school than, say, being thrown on the West Piazza and go for it, because there wasn't everything. When people start busking now, there's an immediate need for money. There's an immediate need for a show to work, or what they created as a show to work. Whereas in this case, there was no need of either. It was purely exploratory. It was purely like, what can I do with the attention? How can I gather the attention? What will happen when people stop? What happens next? How do I get them to form a circle? They all left. What did I do wrong? All of those things. And because we weren't doing it in a more formulaic, generic form, but it was complete free improvisation. And there was no show written per se. There was simply an exercise. And then we'd create sketches in the workshop, and then we try them on the street. And Alan was generous enough to go, it doesn't have to be anything like you normally would see, It doesn't have to be a variety act. One guy went out and smashed a watermelon with his head. That was his show. And it was, but the build up to it and the energy with what he did it with was the thing that drew the crowd.
Yes.
Others had crazy ideas. Others would play musical instruments. Others simply explored funky characters. Martin discovered stillness very quickly. He would stand there and just gaze at people. When we have these huge interactions, 4 of us on a cafe stage, or 5 of us, all vying for attention. And Martin would stand at the back. And finally, we'd all run out of energy, and everybody had noticed this guy just quietly standing at the back. And he would always, it's never a competition, but he'd always become the dominant character at the end of it, simply by not doing anything, by just being. It was clown was a really interesting exploration. And coming at it from that angle, we wanted to be street clowns. The idea of street performer didn't exist as yet in our heads. The idea of clowning was, comedy, making people laugh. That was the aim. That was the goal. The goal was, if you went out there and hey, my partner and I had an act for 2.5 years called the Noodle and Strudel Clown Company. We had the banner on the truck. We went around with a whole lot of trucks. We created a thing called the Gypsy Fair, where we would quietly drive into small little towns of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people at about 2 miles an hour in Old Bedford, beautiful Old Bedford, Austin, Diamond Tees, whatever. And like a parade, it's the same concept that Barnum used. You drove into a small town on a Friday at lunchtime, and everybody was out in the streets, and they'd see these amazing vehicles, and some of us would be juggling, and some of us would be riding unicycles or whatever, and honking horns, making noise, and everybody, it's like Pied Piper, everybody would follow you to the local park or the closest park. We'd make a ring. The stall guys would put out their stalls, sell their bone carvings and pots and whatever, and we put a little stage in front of the truck and did clown shows and put our head out at the end. They were the first busking shows. The money was virtually nothing, but it was a following of the dream, so it didn't matter. Somehow,
how soon was that after the clown workshops?
That was
you did the clown work.
We did the workshops. Then we took that knowledge out of the city, hit the road again with the trucks, because we were living in trucks in Auckland, doing the workshop. Couldn't wait to get out, really, and then hit the road. Somebody came along with the Gypsy Fair concept, which is still going today. That group, that tribe, that is still once a year for 4 months of the year that they tour New Zealand. People come and watch the stuff. A good friend of mine is the muso there. But in those days, we'd do the little shows. Often we'd hire a hall. The House Truckers band would play in the hall. We'd do stuff in between. We came up with a lot of clown gags that kind of worked. We had one called Levitation. It's a classic scenario where you two people, one lies down, you cover him or her with a cloth, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to the audience, she's holding 2 sticks with shoes on the end. All they see is the feet sticking out of the cloth, and all of a sudden she starts to rise like that, holding the legs up straight, and suddenly it's levitation. We did this in pubs. We did this on a Friday night, and people who'd been laughing and taking the piss out of the clowns suddenly watched the levitation thing, and all fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, until the classic clown reveal where, one stands on the cloth while the other walks away, and it's revealed, and everybody's, that's how it's done. Yeah. That whole thing, but it worked. Stuff like
Lovely
that.
Moment.
Yeah. And that was the road end for us. And we did it for a while, and then in 1985 we came to the decision that if we were going to get good at this sort of outdoor entertainment, we had to go where the best are, and that was Europe. We had to go there. There was, much as we loved living in trucks in New Zealand, much as we loved having our dogs around us, and that whole tribal thing and living by the fire and all the rest of it, the thirst for knowledge and the thirst to follow this dream was stronger. So we put all that aside, and went overseas.
So it's almost like a pilgrimage.
Yeah, I got to say, there's a big shout out to a man who was hugely influential. Just in case he's listening. I have no idea where this goes, or whether he might listen to it in a week or a month, a year. His name was Dave Sheridan. He was literally the archetype of the strong man. 6'2", 3", strong, squat, bald head. You know, whatever picture you've ever seen of a strong man, that's Dave. Dave had the leopard tights. Dave worked Covent in the mid-'80s doing the escapology show. Keno took him under his wing and taught him how to do the chains and stuff. But before that, Dave came up to me and Jane, my partner, one winter in 1983. We just finished the clown school and went.
So he was a Kiwi as well then.
He was English. He'd come on.
But he was travelling.
Yeah, and he decided to go and live in New Zealand. His dad had a cart at Covent Garden when it was a market, selling veggies. So he came right out to go and all right, mate, Cockney like. That was his world, and he had that gift of the gab. He wasn't educated at the time. I'm pretty sure he still can't read or write all that well. And that's not a downer in my head at all. That means you learn a completely different way of looking at the world, and it's just as valid as someone who's got a PhD in English literature. It's just a construct. But I mention it just to show that was his background. And he was a remarkable. Still is. He lives on north of Auckland now. Lived in wagons and trucks all his life as well. And he had this idea of wanting to start a circus, a people's circus, no animals, you know. So he was the one who came up to us one winter. We met by chance. There's 2 house trucks parked up in a small little town by the ocean. And he walked up. We were eating fish and chips, and he went, "Been looking for you." I went, "Why?" And he went, "Let's start a circus." No, I had never heard the word before, and I went, "Sure, why not? I'm not doing anything." So we started that wheel in motion. We had a Swiss clown juggler who stepped off a plane while we were in the Coromandel, where all the communities were in New Zealand, kind of the Glastonbury area, creating the circus. Tobias steps off a plane in Auckland, has some juggling clubs sticking out of his back.
Can you just explain who Tobias is?
Tobias, well, he came out of nowhere. He was a Swiss street performer, and he decided to visit New Zealand. Someone saw him at the airport and said, "I've got some friends starting a circus. They're over there, 200 k's away." So he drove straight to us and went, "Here I am. I can juggle," and he could. I'd never seen anybody juggle clubs before. "I have magic tricks, and I have a huge amount of great energy." And he was a part of it. He is now living on the outskirts of Zurich and still does a magic puppet show that he takes around to places. So, you know, we never lose this stuff. We reinvent it to make it work. But as soon as this bug hits you, you've got it for life. So watch out, man.
Got it in the blood.
Yeah,
big time. You're setting up sorry, carry on.
No.
My apologies.
So we created this thing called the People's Circus, and then the Gypsy Fairs started, and so consequently we were doing shows.
Before we go on to that, Dom, can I just get a little bit more about you creating the People's Circus? Because there might be people listening who want to do the same thing themselves. So hearing the process, the interactions could be really helpful for them.
The first way we did it, we drove to New Zealand has an area. There's about 6 or 7 communities, people who bought land and share it together, built little houses, teepees, yurts, house trucks, whatever. One of them is called Sandy Bay, and it was the oldest, the most established one. There was a puppeteer on there called Jonathan Acorn, who's also a great street performer. And we were using that as a base to create it. So essentially it was just putting the word out and seeing who had some creative energy, who wanted to leap on this. None of us had really had any circus skills. We didn't have wire walkers. We didn't have bears, none of that. That came later in my life. But at that stage, it was kind of like, let's take a common story that everybody can relate to. In this case, it was at Alice in Wonderland. And let's build a show using whatever skills One was a musician, a great musician called Ted Chapman. We had Tobias as a juggler. We had Dave as the strong man. We had another guy who had acting skills, whose name escapes me right now. So if you're watching, I'm terribly sorry. And we had a young kid who was part of the family. So that was the cast essentially. I had.
And was it parallel management? Did you write all together? Was it an equal power structure, or did you have your director? Or
never got that big. It was completely like a group of like a band, like a group of artists on the road going, let's work it this way, let's work it that way. I have an idea, try that. Okay, that's great, let's do that. It was kind of acknowledged that it was Dave's idea to start with, so if there was a leader per se, it would fall on Mr. Sheridan's shoulders. And also he was the biggest guy, so if the cops came knocking, you deal with them, you know. But essentially, it was like we were obsessed with the idea. We workshopped it. We cut down manuka trees and filled Dave's bus. He had a big old ex-Auckland City Council bus, transport bus, filled it with all these poles, really heavy, must have weighed about 2 tons. And we used that.
So it was a manuka tree like bamboo then?
Yeah, but very heavy, like a serious tea tree, serious wood, hard wood, grew thin, about that in diameter, but really, really solid. And so we used them as poles. We'd borrowed the circus sidings from one of the festivals, but we didn't have the top. We had an open air, put a center bamboo pole, put bunting down, and essentially you had a closed-off area that kind of looked colourful on a public space with a certain amount of signage and the funky vehicles around it. It looked like a circus, vaguely like a circus from a distance. And we ran it over school holidays in summer. You know, people would be walking along the beach. We'd see the sign. We'd drive through town, kind of like the Blues Brothers when you watch the film years later. You know, but instead of the guys in shades and in the Cadillac, it was a house truck with a loudspeaker going, "Circus is in town. Come and check it out." You know, put ads in papers and never did great, but it was an experience, and we made enough to put groceries on table and diesel and tax. And then we'd drive on. The beauty of New Zealand is it's like Europe, and suddenly which is why that whole traveling lifestyle never really took off in Australia as much, because Australia is vast. You're driving huge distances here. New Zealand's like Europe. You drive 50k, there's another town. You know, much like you drive 50k in France, you're in another village. You drive 50k in England, more or less, probably the same thing. Everything's much closer. You've got a lot more people, so you didn't have to expend a huge amount of energy transporting this whole thing. You know, you could have enough. A diesel tank would last you four towns down the road.
And did you ever have really dry days where you had to find diesel to keep going?
Oh yeah. There were rough days. But there was, and since then I've met a lot of people who have done it. Cirque Bidon in France, who became Archaeos. I met them in Paris. They'd done that whole road. We sat down and talked and drank a huge amount of wine for a couple of nights when they had some old stables where they were training on the edge of Paris before they went to London. And I just went out to hang out because I wanted to be around travellers, and me and the guy whose name escapes me, who used to eat the chickens, the main character. They'd started with horses in the bottom of France.
They do horse and carts.
Yeah, horse and carts, and one would carry, again, the seating, a circus ring, and a pole, and that's how they did it for about 5 years in the center of France and the south of France. And then again, like us, half of them came to a decision where, well, this is all fine and this is all funky, but we really want to get good at what we're doing. And the other half was like, we really like living like this. We don't care how bad the show is. We just love, it's the lifestyle for us, not the show. Whereas the other half, it's the show, not the lifestyle. And for us, for me and Jane, that's what happened. It became, okay, we're starting to learn how to perform, but we could be so much better. If there's that dream when you're at the other end of the world and there's these beacons of light. I mean, Paris has been the center for mime, has been the center for clown for a long time, ever since Etienne Decroux came up with his mime scale, and Jean-Louis Barrault learnt the art and put it on the French map. Suddenly mime became fashionable, Same with clown to a degree. The greatest clowns I've ever seen have been in Europe. Although Popov was, when the Moscow Circus came to Auckland, he was pretty phenomenal. Do you ever see Popov?
Russia, culturally, no, I haven't. But culturally, Russia is it's always been classed as Europe, strangely. It's not classed as Asia, which is very strange.
And also
I think
Russia.
The royal families is such like. Just out of interest, just to get onto the chronology of this thing. So you did the travel at the People Circus, you travelled with that, you then decided, okay, we have to do this pilgrimage to Europe.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about the experience of, the things you went through to move there and what it was like when you first went there? The experiences of being in this new place.
Massive cultural change, massive. I mean, you're living in a small, isolated country. We didn't have TV. We didn't have any access to, there were no computers then anyway, but television was the main media. So if you're not watching any of that, you have no idea what's going on in the outside world, which we weren't. So, we sold the truck. My dog went to my dad's farm. We put everything, all the possessions we had in 3 suitcases, and got on a plane and landed in Oakland Airport at 9 o'clock in the morning in San Francisco.
How did you feel? Were you afraid?
Like stranger in a strange land. No fear. Initially, no fear. Oakland's black, completely black. And I'd never been around so many black people. So they'd probably never seen 2 white clowns catching public transport that early in the morning. There was a system called BART, which it's like the metro in San Francisco. That's how we got into town. Never seen, I'd seen poverty before because my parents, I traveled a lot when I was a kid, but not on this scale. And not when you don't have a lot of money in your pocket and people are seriously begging, living in streets. It took 3 days before we actually ventured out of the hotel. And it was a slimy little, falling apart place in the Mission. And all we could hear was what sounded like gunfire and loud voices all the time, whereas just cars backfiring and a few drunks. But that whole thing of going to a whole new land, just wow. And then, the first place we'd found we've got to go and start earning money. Let's go and find a place to do a show. So we found the tram stop right down by the bottom, halfway between the Mission and Embarcadero, where all the trams stopped. And it looked rough as guts. And we tried it anyway and died miserably. But someone came up and went, "You shouldn't be here. You should be at Pier 39 and Fisherman's Wharf. It's over the hill there. Go there." And so that's the first time we went over the hill. And we went and discovered Pier 39. The first street performer we ever saw there was Robert, the Butterfly Man.
Robert Nelson.
Yeah. And that was mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. Because this guy was on fire. And he was playing with a crowd. It was like you could feel the tension in the air. It's like a knife edge. He would constantly mimic the racial thing. Pretending to, there was 2 tiers. There was a huge black audience on the veranda around the pier, and white middle-class audience down the bottom, tourists, and all the black guys would be at the top. And he would be constantly dissing them, and they would be loving it and constantly dissing him back. And it was, for us who'd never been to that part of the world, I thought he was going to get crucified, at the end of it. And then to have the audacity to pick the largest one, get him on a stage, give him a foam stick and say, hit me, motherfucker, hit me hard, hard. Let me feel it. And the poor guy, no, man, I'm going to kill you. If I hit you, oh, man, you're going to wind up dead, motherfucker. No, hit me. And this whole thing, this whole parody, constantly pushing, things further, taking a child out, lying them on the floor, juggling knives over them, while saying, hey, I do kids' parties as well. I'm really good at this shit. Kid, don't move, you die. All that sort of stuff. He was, it was, wow. It was like,
Why do
like
you
that.
think that people would allow him to push so hard?
Because he was really comfortable. Because he wasn't afraid. He was fearless. And in reality, once you got to know him, as I did later on in life, he was a really gentle, sweet guy. Almost split personality at time. When Robert came, and when the butterfly came out, it was a very different guy to when Robert was sitting having a conversation with you in your living room. But when Robert came out, there was no stopping the guy. There was no stopping the guy. And, he was so quick. The wit was acerbic, that whole thing, how sharp is this knife? Audiences normally ask me, how sharp is this knife? A lot sharper than this audience. You would throw it at them constantly, and they would love it. They would love it because American audiences are the loudest we're ever going to get. They are loud.
Not afraid to show emotions.
No, they will talk, yell back at you. Oh, look at you! Oh, it's funny. All that. They will do all of that constantly.
And so, what did you take away from seeing Robert Nelson?
Oh my God, Noodle and Strudel are never going to be able to compete with that. Not that there's again, but to be on the same stage as that would be mind blowing. But my instant realization after walking out of the Pier 39 was, okay, let's find a smaller, more intimate, calmer place to work. Kind of like when performers turned up later, many years later at the Pompidou Centre, they would look at the top pitch and go, "That's too tough. I'll go over there." Or kind of like Covent, when a lot of performers first came to Covent, I'd imagine they'd go, "All right, that's the big place. That's the big pitch." It's like Edinburgh, the Mound. Not many people wanted to work the top of the Mound before it became the Royal Mile. It's a hard space to work. So your caliber, your talent at the time allows you to decide where you're going to fit in. And for some people, they only get that far. Other people get this far. Other people get that far. And again, that's no difference. Some people only get this far, but have amazing talent. And people get that far and have no talent. So it's not necessarily a question of how brilliant you are as a performer or how good at what you are at what you're doing. It's more, how have you understood this world and how do you fit into it? In Robert's way, he was Pier 39. He didn't work anywhere else. Occasionally the Cannery, but Pier 39 was him. So we auditioned for the Cannery. We rang up the Cannery. Didn't realize that all the performers were going to audition. Just thought that there was some guy in the head office came in with all the photos, we're from New Zealand. Yeah, we don't talk like you. This is us. We've done all these little cute shows on, see our truck, all this stuff. And they'd be going, yeah, that looks cute, man. And so we turned up for the audition, and there was a whole front row of all the performers that normally worked because they were going to figure out the monthly draw immediately after the auditions. And there were two people that were auditioning that day. And the first was a Las Vegas juggling duo style. By that time, I'd sort of seen everybody around, as much as I could, the High Mile Circus, and kind of got an idea of what was going on and how people were, doing their art form there. And these guys were slick, tuxedos. One guy's warming up juggling 5 balls comfortably. I can barely juggle 3, at that stage. And, it was like these So we watched them, and we watched them do the audition, and I whispered to Jane, the only way we're going to get this is just to go friggin' crazy. Just to pull the clowns out and forget any form of talent or skill, just blow their minds by being completely off and over the top. And we did, you know. Jane actually tied Robert Dana and Fred Anderson up with toilet paper, you know, whilst running around them, screaming at the top of their lungs. You know, we just went crazy on there, and they'd never seen this. And I still have in my mind that picture of that day of all these performers, and many of them became good friends after that as the years rolled on. But that's the first time they'd ever seen me and Jane. They were just staring at us, aghast, and shocked, going, "The hell is this? Where has this come from? Who are these people? What are they doing? Is it working? Is it what we do?" And it was completely, there were no one-liners. There was no slick skill under the leg. Oh, John, that's going to hurt. There was none of that. It was just like, you know, two people going crazy, screaming at each other, barely holding it together on the stage, but full of energy, you know. And we got it. They didn't want the Vegas crew because I guess they might have been too threatening. There were so many other double acts there. I don't know. I will never know. But they went, yeah, if you want the cannery, join the draw. So we went, okay, we will. Can't say we ever did great there, but we did, you know, 2 or 3 shows a week.
What was your first show like that?
We had a sack escape. I'd done a fair amount of research in New Zealand. What can we do? What can we do? And I'd gone through Houdini's books and read about Houdini. And he had a bag escape. And I thought, that's clever. Never seen that before. So we had that, and that no one was doing.
With electronic? Is that with electronic release?
No, it was completely organic. It was a large mail
but
bag.
You know what I mean by electronic release when you have the metal ring and chains.
Yep. Yeah? No, not that.
So it wasn't.
No. You could have used that inside the bag and come out without it.
The only reason I say is I've seen bag acts nowadays, and those two things tend to be coupled together very regularly now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen the electric release you mentioned. I've seen that quite a few times. It was almost done as a comedy gag a lot of the time. In fact, the circus that we joined that saved our ass in America, Nick did that. But no, this was a large bag that you could actually fit a human being in with a drawstring, and you'd wrap it up. People could tie it around. One black sailor in Paris actually picked up Jane and twirled her around like a lasso, which was pretty impressive. But she almost died doing it as a solo act on the quay. She got a sailor who she had figured out how to do it by herself, and he tied it so tight that she suddenly realized that she was choking to death, and she rolled over to a performer on the back who was waiting to do a show, and was like, Alex, and he suddenly realized, oh shit, she's starting to pass out. Got up, undid the knots, and relaxed it. So yeah, there was an element of, we didn't know at the time, but there was an element of danger in it. But with me, I could do a bit of a powder, go on, put your heart into it. You know, have you ever tied women in a bag before, sir, and all that sort of stuff. And that kind of, that was a bit of a finale at the end. There was something that would, okay, how's she going to get out of the bag, We juggled fire. I used to walk over it. I discovered this in a paddock, the walk of death, which since then has become almost a standard piece of the book of if you look at what can I do, Gareth's done it. So many people have done it.
It's one of the routines now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's classic. Like getting up on a high unicycle and juggling 3 torches, same thing. But at that time, I did it. I figured it out in a paddock in New Zealand, surrounded by sheep while I was learning to juggle. I suddenly realized I could walk while I was doing it. Then I thought, Jane, hey, come on over, lie down for a second. What's it look like if I juggle over you? And I'm thinking it just like that. And then we realized, hey, this could work. And we did it in the Gypsy Fair days. I built these torches out of because none of the juggling gear was available in New Zealand. So I took a broomstick, cut it in three, took a rolling pin for pastry, cut that in three, screwed the big thing onto the longer thing, and then wrapped it around with sash cords, which were used to have windows up and down in old wooden buildings, soaked it in kerosene. Woof, they were my torches. Guys would walk up to me at the end of a show in America and go, "What are they? Where did you get them from?" Because they're all buying, the latest juggle art and and latest equipment, whereas we couldn't afford it at the time. So I was still using my heavy stonker things. And I read that in a book written by a New York guy who was teaching circus skills at New York University. And he'd learned it off the Russians. Libraries, mate. The amount of knowledge in libraries when there was no internet. So all this stuff was there. You kind of had the bones of it, but you just had to suddenly figure out how it was going to work. But cut a long story short, San Francisco was getting really hard for us because we just weren't making bucks, and we were paying rent, and doing odd jobs here and there to make it happen. But it was getting tight. And then Dana Smith, lovely guy. He had a handstand show with his dog. Came up to us and went, "I've got a friend who runs a circus. He's looking for people for the summer. Do you want to go and join him?" And I remembered the People Circus days and thought, cool, that could be fun. Living with people, seeing America. That'd be a great way to see America. So we went, yeah. So we rocked down to a Jesuit novitiate in Santa Barbara. Dana drove us down with all our gear. And met Nick, who was a Jesuit priest, but also a showman. And he'd started the smallest circus in the world, like 5, 6, 7 years ago before we got there. And at that stage, he was operating out of a car, and now it was like 3 vehicles, and he had animals and seats and an organ and loads of stuff. And we went, yeah, let's join your circus. What can we do? So we joined that. I did the Houdini milk can escape with Nick Circus. Allegedly the first person to do it in America since the great man died. Who knows? But it was fun at the end of a show when you're really hot to get into a stainless steel milk urn, and then all the water would rise out. They'd put the lid on, put a cabinet over it. Nick would be doing the powder out there while I quietly got out and waited, and then after 90 seconds, when it seemed like it couldn't contain anymore, you'd sort of like shake yourself up with it and then rush out, go like a drowning dog, and it was fun. It was fun. I got cramp in winter because when the days got colder and you were in the hills of Portland, Oregon, or Washington State, and we got into freezing water. But yeah, that was an experience. And that kind of kept, the circus didn't pay, but he looked after us whilst we were in America. So we got to see every little hick town from the Canadian border to the Mexican border all along the West Coast.
And how are the audiences? Were they happily receiving you?
Depends where you went. A lot of the time we did universities. Cool. We played soup kitchens. We did the 5th floor of Macy's one day in Portland, Oregon, which is like going up into David Jones and right up the top there. We did a lot of churches, obviously, because he had that connection. He wasn't putting out a Christian message. There was no, I am doing this because God has told me this and this is my path. It was, to all appearances, a circus. We did a lot of streets. We played a lot of circus malls. It was essentially like any other street show that you'd run into. Nick was political. He would take the piss out of the Reagan administration at the time. And in small one-horse town where everybody's chewing gum, there were a couple of times where I felt that we drove that if we'd waited 5-10 minutes more, the good old boys would have turned up in their pickup trucks with all their baseball bats to teach the hippies a different way of looking at things. There was a bit of that. And occasionally, he wasn't afraid to seriously tell people what he believed was right and wrong. He was a showman. He was that archetype of the American Needs You, the poster you see with Uncle Bill. Yeah, that's it. That was his face. That was the guy. The white goatee, the white beard, the look. They always dressed up in tights. Jane and I refused to do that. We didn't like the tight Elizabethan look. We kept our clown gear and our costumes, but Nick and all the others were in tights, running around in tights. We had animals. The bear lost the plot. We had a Himalayan bear that, when it stood up, was about 7, 8 feet tall, called Jilly. Jilly had an aversion to duct tape, which is what you wrap around electrical fittings. There's a substance in there that would set her off. And Pidge, the dwarf, left the duct tape next to the cage, just as Nick was taking her out in the back, and I was introducing her. So instead of him walking out with his bear walking out behind him like that, they rolled out together, and all of a sudden her claws were in his thighs and the blood was starting to run. And we had metal chairs that she'd walk upon around. And my first reflex was to grab one of those, going, I will get one shot at this. Now, this was in the heart of downtown Sacramento, in the shopping mall, and we were 7 deep around us. And the first 4 rows were all kids, seated. And here's a wild animal with no fence, no cage, nothing, that suddenly lost its connection with the trainer. And that's starting to get aggro. So I grabbed the nearest bear stool, lifted it up in the air, and I was going to cloud it with her and then run, figuring I might just knock her out. And Nick saw me, and he was on the ground, going, no, I'll get it, and managed to hang on to her long enough to resume the eye contact. And suddenly she became completely calm, went through the whole routine, even though his legs were bleeding. There was a television crew there. They were filming it for the news, filming the show. It's not often you get a small little circus set up in downtown Sacramento, being the capital of California. And when we finished, our next gig was at a university, and we drove there in trepidation, going, this will be all over the news. Bear loses the plot in circus. No mention. They put footage of the circus. It was all great, kids laughing, everybody laughing. No mention. We couldn't believe it. This wild animal got that close to wiping a few kids off the face of the planet, and no one said boo. No one said boo. It's America.
How do you feel about it? How do you feel about animals in the circus? You experienced it more than most people.
Mixed. I've worked in traditional circus as well. I've woken up every morning and opened up lion cages and tigers. A couple of them almost got me. I've lain under elephants. I got caught by an elephant in a circus truck for 3 hours. He was playful. He didn't want to hurt me, but he wasn't going to let me out. He was just bored. Oh, here's someone to play with. I'd gone in there to give some medicine to the monkeys and done that, and he wouldn't let me do it. Every time I walked past, the trunk would come out and push me gently but firmly back into the truck. I did the commands, stand, all the whole thing that his owner did. And so I was in there for an hour or so until the owner walked past and went, "Oi!" I've been with circus people. I know that for them, it's like you and your dog. They're that connected to those animals. Most circuses I've ever seen have always treated their animals with the greatest respect they can, given the environment they're in. And yet, I'm kind of glad they're not in shows anymore. I'm kind of glad it served a purpose. When Barnum created Ringling and Bailey Circus, Ringling, Bailey and Barnum, whatever it was called, there was no television. People had never seen animals. So to put them on a train and take them around a country so that people could get to see an elephant for the first time, a giraffe, a tiger, a lion, a wolf, an ostrich, whatever. Sure, it was educational. But now, I don't know. And, it's been phased out. There are less and less. The costs, the hassles, You know, it's going to be a page in a history book pretty soon, if not already. Yeah. It was
And
always what
so,
circus was about. I mean, circus started as platforms on horses because they weren't allowed to perform outdoors in the one spot. They had to keep moving it. So the very first guy who came up with the word circus in London created a stage with horses underneath it, so the stage would move. And that's how he got around the bylaws that said that you weren't allowed to perform outside in one spot and that's where they got the idea of bringing in animals and all the rest of it. But you were going to go.
yeah. So, how long did you work with those guys for then? When you were
We
traveling around
did
America, circus.
we did about 8 months with them, and then when it ended, we stayed with Tobias, who'd moved to California from New Zealand, and was in on the edge in San Francisco, and then we flew out to Paris. We had the tickets. We were only allowed 6-month visa into the States. We didn't have green cards or anything. We actually did an audition for Ringling and Barnum in Bailey. They were looking to the clown college that was running in Florida. We're looking for new, and they go around every town and they do auditions. And when we did the audition, the woman at the end goes, "We love you. We want you for Ringling and Barling and Bailey, the clown school where Rob Torres and so many others came out of." And the only fly in the ointment was that we weren't Americans. And they tried for 2 months. Weekly phone calls. Our lawyers are doing this, our lawyers are doing that. But in the end, they realized it was just too big to get us to become a part of that and deal with U.S. immigration.
Some visa issues. It was governmental issues, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And so, did you decide to leave America then? I suppose you had to leave America then.
We were looking forward to Europe. I mean, Paris was the goal. America was a step on the way. We didn't want to simply fly to one. It's a big planet. You wanted to explore all of it. But we landed in Paris. It was snowing. I still remember Jane lying with all our gear on a park bench at Saint Michel. I knew of the Latin Quarter. I knew that there were cheap hotels there. So I went and found this, a place to live, and then we started living in Paris, and Paris became home for almost 3 years.
And what was the first experiences of being in Paris then?
Well, it was winter, and tried doing shows in the subway, in the metro, juggling shows in the corridors, and got thrown out so many times that I realized that they were onto it. It wasn't going to be viable. No one was working the streets in winter. It was just too cold. Musicians occasionally. And then spring came, and suddenly, performers started to come out of the woodwork and start to use the Pompidou Center. First one I saw was Cotton. Other than the fire eaters, got to understand one of the reasons we went to France was that my parents are French, so I grew up in 2 languages. Ça veut dire que je peux parler et faire tout le discours en français, sans problème. J'étais élevé sur les 2 langues. Alors pour moi, aller à un à l'autre, ça fait aucune différence. D'ailleurs, j'ai même un petit accent parisien. So I'm really comfortable with both languages, to cut a long story short. And so it made sense that I had the right to be there from the blood, and I knew the language. That's why we didn't head for England. We headed for Paris because that was the learning centre. Lecoq was there, De Creux was there, and all the other Gaulier and all the other schools, and also it was exotic. It was different. It was France, but it was tough. It was tough. It was seriously tough. Tough years.
Why? Why was it tough?
It's a big city. It's 14 million now. It would have been about 10 million there. 2, you had a serious hierarchy of street theatre at Pompidou. Pompidou was essentially the only legal place you could street perform. You could, and we would crash those in Tuileries, the Gardens, Saint Michel at night, Saint Germain at night. You could try and crash them. But the only place where you could actually turn up every day and work was Pompidou. That was the one place they left you alone. Now, Pompidou was the size of, it's a giant center, housing a museum, art galleries, etc., blah, giant tourist attraction. And the outside piazza was the size of 2 football fields, slowly coming down into the flat part down the bottom where the building was built. So the only place where we were legally allowed to use street shows, we weren't allowed up the top where everybody was walking. The only place you could work it was down the bottom, which means that all of a sudden you're way down the bottom. People are hundreds of yards away. There's no cross flow. There's no one walking behind you. You're out there all alone in a giant concrete barren space, having to go, I'm over here, I'm really good, come and watch. And that's why it was essentially the realm of the fire eaters, the cracheurs, as they call them in France, literally to crash, to spit. And along with that, there was a troop of them.
Because it's large and striking, I take it.
Yeah, exactly. They did chains, the better nails traditionally. There was always 2 or 3 of them. One guy.
Sorry, carry on.
One guy would do all the blah blah. One guy would lie on the bed of nails. One guy would do a sword swallow. Another guy would do a fire spit, and they would take in. And when it was quiet, not in the height of summer at the holidays or on a weekend, they would work right on the corner. I think David China mentioned a bit of this as well. I got there after David, sadly. I heard all about him, but I never got to witness David at the Brawl, which was a great loss to me because I'd love to have seen him as a clown. But there were other amazing clowns working it too. And when I was
about hierarchy, you said there was a hierarchy there.
Well, number one, the fire eaters. They were all French. They were local. They basically ruled the place. Literally, we saw fights. If you disagreed with them, they would chase you away with iron bars. So there was that side of shit. And often there were different groups of cracheurs. So one would turn up and they were like at war with each other a lot of the time through, God knows why, feuds. So there was all that animosity. And Ludo, the big guy, I don't know if you've ever seen photos of Ludo. Ludo was 6'6". He's built like a bear. He was an ex-French mercenary. And he got his stomach blown out in action. Mine, I'm not sure. I have no idea how it happened. But he went to hospital and consequently lost all feeling. So he had this flat part of his, he was a fat guy, he was big, and the front of his stomach was all solid. And his act was that he would get women to throw darts at his bare stomach, as in the same darts that you see in an English pub, those metal spikes. And of course they'd be freaked out to hell. They didn't want to hurt anybody. And but it was meaningless to me. He had stomach muscles in there that he developed because of the surgery. So you could literally go up to someone and just flex the stomach muscles and throw them 6 feet. One of the most amazing street shows I ever saw. There was a mime there who now lives in a Canadian mine called Pony. Pony now lives. He's done a TED talk recently. Check him out. He's cool. But he's in Sweden. I think he's Copenhagen, no, Denmark, Copenhagen. But in those days, he was seriously good street mime. And on a Sunday he was doing a killer show. Halfway up because Sunday all of a sudden you could get about 6 circles going. It was madness. And he was doing a really good one halfway up. And at that time, Paris was in love with sumo wrestling. It was the greatest thing, that all the sumo wrestling troops would come over from Japan and tour in the theaters and do their shtick in theaters, and people would pay good money to see sumo wrestlers. So these guys were all on holiday, and they were walking through the center, and they go and walk up to Pony's crowd. He had huge crowds, and watch what he's doing, and ha ha laugh. He's spoiling, and his mind really clever. Spotted them, pulled the biggest one out, went, stay there, don't move. Ran up to Ludo, who was having a break, pulled Ludo down, knowing about Ludo's stomach muscles. Got them, set up this whole thing of, sumo. And went, no hands, stomach to stomach. No, and then again went to Ludo, waved at him, do your thing, and Ludo just went flick, and the sumo wrestler got thrown back 6-8 feet, rolled over, got up, went, he was completely blown out by it. All his friends came running out, going, what happened? So of course they had to do it again and again and again. Meanwhile, Pony's show trebled, and you did a great hat. You did a great hat. There was some,
of course, and that's the beauty of street. The beauty of street is that unexpected things like that can happen. You can think on the spot. You can use the things that come in front of you.
I had a helicopter land in my show at Pompidou. I had the closest circle on a Sunday to the center, and when you're looking at it from the air, there's like 6 different circle shows going at once. Mine was the closest to the doors, down the bottom. And they needed somewhere to land to get someone out of the hospital who had a heart attack in the center. So they went straight for my circle. And suddenly this chopper landed in the middle of the show, destroying everyone else's and making mine 3 times the size. So what am I doing? I'm playing with the driver. I'm washing, spinning on his windshield and trying to hang up there. And, it was just hysterical. I mean, they were in and out in 3 or 4 minutes, but you just got to play with it. I was hanging on to the thing, trying to hold it down. And, it's with whatever you can go through your mind. Getting in and talking to the guy. Yeah.
Police officers running will be tackling you to the ground.
Yeah. You could get away with murder then. I mean, China had this whole bit with the local coppers. They would lean over. There was a police station up the top, and then they walk across the street, and then they'd see the whole piazza come down. And they would lean on the rail and just watch the shows because they were bored. And right next to them was a drain pipe. And David, allegedly, I never saw it, but heard about it, would run up the drain pipe to the nearest cop, grab his hat, swap hats, and run back down with the copper's hat and parade around and mimic the cop. And all the cops loved it. And then ran up again and swapped hats again. And that became a bit in his show because he simply had the audacity to do it the first time. And they liked it. And then they went, yeah, cool. Yeah.
And of course, once they know that you're not doing it out of malice, once they know that you're playing with stuff, playing with them.
Yeah, I mean, there was cheekiness. They
want to be included.
Yeah. I mean, in Australia, in the double act with Andy, we did some pretty amazing things with coppers because they would always drive through shows with their cars, and so you could stop them.
Get onto I assume Australia's later, right? So you do Paris. And I was talking to people before because I try and talk to people about my interviewees before, and you were working in Covent Garden, so you've obviously moved from Paris at some point, and I assume you went to Covent Garden before you went back to Australia.
No, I completely bypassed England that time. I didn't do Covent Garden until Andy and I turned up.
Okay, wow.
Which is I would do Paris during the year, and in the summer go south. Do festivals, Switzerland. Switzerland was a big draw card. You could earn in a month in Switzerland enough to live in Paris for 6 months a year comfortably. And the Swiss had a very unusual way of dealing with street theatre. They would feel always the desire to pay for it, even if they were watching it from 500 yards away, not part of a circle act. You would never put your hat away at the end of a show. People would constantly come up afterwards, sometimes 10 minutes later, while you're packing, and put money in. There was this you did culture, you did something for our town, have something. And the Swiss franc was the highest form of currency in Europe at the time, so we went for that. And there was lots of lovely little towns. You know, and you'd end the Swiss season with the Zurich Tower Spectacle. That's when we were all kind of gather, and suddenly you'd be 30, 40 performers, and and also a lot of the
fringe kind of thing.
yeah, kind of. It would end for a week. It would be like, but more a party because we'd all done the summer. You'd made your money. So you'd still do shows, you know, but all the vans would be parked up and because the Swiss had really nice places to park alongside the lake with showers. And, biggest crowd I ever got in Switzerland was changing an engine on the combi I had. They'd never seen that. The Swiss are so they're so. We don't know how to change a light bulb. We'll hire a handyman to do that. Whereas I come from a land down under where you had to, you know, the clutch is gone, but a number 8 wire that'll do it. You know, you'd think on your feet all the time. How can I fix this? How can I, you know, I've got a problem. Lateral thinking, all constantly. So yeah, when an engine died in the combi, it was like, okay, I went out and asked for one in the street, and on the third day, somebody walked up at the end of a show and went, "Yeah, I have a friend. He has old combi engine in his garage. Here's his number. You talk to him. He will give you it." And yeah, I got a combi engine, paid a couple of hundred Swiss francs for it. He dropped it off next to the combi, which was in a park down the bottom of. This was in Lausanne, near on the lake. And then the following day, took mine out, put his in, fired it up, and away it went. But that,
so how long
everybody,
did you? Yeah, sorry, carry on.
I was just everybody just couldn't believe that you could do that.
It's a spectacle.
It is. It is.
Just very quickly, I really like the idea that you're asking in shows, and eventually someone comes up and helps. Because I've heard this old story that performers, when the money wasn't there, you'd perform at the end of the show, you'd say, "I need somewhere to stay. I want some dinner."
Yep.
And people would, you know, it's the other way of getting through your life. But just I'm really focusing on trying to work the chronology out of what we're doing, or what you were doing. And so you were in Paris, and then you're traveling through Paris. You made a life of going through the festivals, working the scenes, getting the idea of what's going on there. So what's the progression after that?
Expo turns up. Expo 86 in Vancouver was the first to use street performance, and they did it on a small local scale. They brought in a few people from Europe, but not the big scale. Expo 80, the Australian organisers of Expo 88 in Brisbane had seen the reaction, the very positive reaction that audiences had to street performers there, and went, "We need that for Brisbane." So in 88, Jane went back to Australia. I stayed and did the summer season as a solo act. At that stage, we'd come to a realization that 3 years as a double act was either going to kill the relationship if we kept going, or we could stay together for life, or for longer and not be a double act. Because, you know, a double act is a marriage of kinds. It's very hard to be on a stage and share that energy with someone who's that close to you and who really knows you. Anyway, that happened, and she went back and set up her camp in Sydney. And I'd vaguely heard of Expo, so I sent some feelers, and I approached it via the New Zealand government, who were looking for entertainers outside the pavilion, figuring it was going to pay me more, and worked for the New Zealand pavilion for a while before getting approached by the other Expo. So Expo was the way in to the way home for us, and also we kind of figured that we'd done what we needed to do in Europe. It'd be nice to keep this ball rolling, and three European winters in a row was nice to see the sun again, sort of thing. The first one was in a boat on the Seine. The first place we found to live in Paris was a Dutch. You know, the French of the peniche. the long boats, which have been going up and down the canals, kind of like the ones you have in England, but twice as wide.
Yeah.
And
So we call them narrowboats.
Yeah.
Because they're narrow, you know.
For the canals, whereas the French ones are for rivers. And they load them up with coal, and this was the Dutch version of one of those. There was an English captain on it. He'd bought it. He'd sailed it from Amsterdam to London, and from London to Paris, and he had it moored in Paris, and he was renting out rooms in it. And so our first European winter was hearing the water lapping against the side of the boat every morning and feeling that cold. Yeah, it is. It is.
Oh, it gets cold. If you don't have the fire on, it gets cold.
Oh, yeah. It's like icy cold. Cold that gets in the bones. And, yeah, rats as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. So you go to Expo 88 in Australia.
Yep.
You go to this. And is this really a changing point then?
It is. It's a huge changing point for Australia. Street theatre or busking, the circle show as we know it at that stage had not been seen in Australia. There'd been a few visionaries, people who like Glenn Nicholas, great Australian comedian. He'd been to Paris, seen the stuff at Pompidou, and had tried to do the same in Adelaide. Then you had the Doug Anthony All Stars. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They got pretty big.
Actually, know the name.
Yeah, they won the Perrier Awards at Edinburgh a couple of years, and they used to do one show in Edinburgh, and it would be sold out. Huge act, really funny guys. But they also did streets a lot, and three guys singing crazy songs, punks almost, but nice guys, and they'd tried a bit of street. There'd been a few little street theatre companies start up, but nothing on the scale of what suddenly hit Brisbane. Can you imagine these? They brought in 60 of the world's best from around the planet to come to Australia. And then by Actors' Equity laws, they had to have an equivalent amount of Australian entertainers, which is why people like Lucky Rich started off as a flower pot at Expo, because they had to have people walking around and all these crazy street theatre ideas that they had.
Lucky Diamond Rich, the most tattooed man in the world, a towering metal-toothed dominator of street shows.
Yep.
It's a flower pot.
Yep. For a World Expo. They were desperate. The organisers were desperate to equate the amount of Australian performers doing the outside walkways with the amount of imports. So they figured that they could teach Australian actors, circus people, quick walk-arounds ideas, and then hire them. And that way the name was in the book for the unions. And Lucky had just finished Albury, the circus school. I think he was 16, 17. And he'd come up to Brisbane because he'd heard of the expo and he'd heard that there'd be all these buskers. And he got in, and that was one of his sketches that he had to, But he got in and he instantly got to see all the performers that expo brought.
So, what was the festival like? As you experienced it, as you walked around, as you saw this thing, how would you recall it?
It's a giant World Trade thing. So you've got 20, 30 pavilions, and in between them you had walkways. And everybody, we weren't doing it for hats. So everybody had paid to get in the place, and you had to go and do 3 shows a day. And they'd seen nothing like it. So they would just come back and back and back and back to see street shows. So every time you walked out, it was instant crowd. And there were phenomenal acts there. Roger G, black skateboard dancer, skates, rollerblades dancer from New York City. He actually got adopted by an Australian family because they loved him so much. They loved the show so much that after seeing it 30, 40 times, They wanted to take him to the farm. He was going to be the long lost son. It had that impact on people. And then you had the impact on the town, where every street performer or anybody thinking of being a street performer in Australia suddenly went, "This is it." So you had a lot of people who turned up from overseas on tourist visas who couldn't get into Expo, but were working the Brisbane Mall. There were as many internationals working the mall as there were on the Expo side. And it was just like the circus had come to town. This was a one-horse town. You could have fired a cannon down it on a Friday night and not hit anybody. And suddenly, this huge circus turned up. I tell you, it blew the town out of the water. They were flying in psychiatrists and therapists months after the event had finished to deal with people who suddenly, this huge excitement, this thing that had been a part of their lives for 6 months had finished and moved on, and they couldn't deal with that. There were people sitting in the Brisbane Mall 3 months after Expo had finished, religiously waiting. There will be a show. There will be a show. There will be a show. It was insane, the effect it had. I had people coming up to me years and years later, in Darling Harbour or in Sydney, wherever I performed in Australia. "I saw you at Expo, mate." And people would remember that. It left such an impression on a country that had never seen this form of theatre before. I mean, it was like high circus skills, crazy minds, statues, people saying the most outrageous things, people doing the most outrageous things. They'd just not seen that before. And it was like, wow. Those of us who could legally stay realized that it was crazy going anywhere else right now. We were hot. So we set up, there was a street performer camp that set up on the Gold Coast. And a very clever man called Tara Divya, he was a statue for World Expo. Very good one. He had the robotic stuff down pat. And he had this great pitch where he'd walk into the head of the big malls of the Gold Coast and go, "You've been hiring all these, you pay $5,000 for a full page ad in a newspaper, and no one comes to your mall, or very few. You can't tell the difference. Believe me, I know, because I've done the statistics. Now, if you give me that $5,000, I will put Expo performance in your mall, and that will draw people to your mall. What do you reckon's the better bet? Give me the $5,000, and you will have statues, fire eaters, jugglers, the lot." And they all went for it. So all of a sudden, we started to rent high-rise condos down by the ocean, and it was party central. And suddenly it became the Covent Garden holiday village, because all the boys had come in from the Kino was there, and Nick was there. A lot of people set up camp. And it became, it became a lot more regulated as time progressed, and suddenly the council decided, okay, we'll run it now, but we'll be able to pay you X amount of retainer per show, and you get the hat, and suddenly, and we'll sponsor you to come over, and all the rest of it. And besides, immigration was a lot more lax then. So street theatre hit Australia. I thought I was already set up in Sydney. After Expo finished, I thought, there's none in Sydney. They've just done the bicentennial. Let's go open up Sydney. And so I went down, and there was this big, huge new complex that had just been built called Darling Harbour. And they've been putting on all this quasi-street theatre and whatever, whoever would go out and sing a song or do a magic act or whatever, who'd never done the street at all.
And was this booked?
And all this was booked, and they had this huge budget from the state government. But that was 88, and the budget ended at the end of 88. So at 89, I'm knocking on the door going, okay, your budget's gone. But guess what? You don't have to pay us. We just want the right to work here. And it took a lot of rubbing up, schmoozing. We put competitions on the first time. They didn't understand.
Using a little bit, just for people who want to open pictures and to deal with councils and bodies. What's the process for that?
The process is that you've got to find somebody in there that can understand what you're talking about and is on your side, or at least open to what you're offering. And then you, from that point onwards, you start to build it. The process is you've got to go and knock on a lot of doors, and you've got to make it, what you do look good in their eyes. It's got to fill their needs. And yet at the same time, you have to keep it integral to the art form. I got into trouble. I ran events for a while, and I would always kind of get in trouble with the councils because for me, it was always the performer first. Number one is the guy doing the show. Whereas for other event organizers, number one, it's who's paying me. For me, it was like, if I've gone to the trouble of bringing people, I remember being in a room once when I was running the Fremantle Buskets Festival, and the mayor was really worried. Public liability had just started to raise its head, and the mayor was really worried he'd lose his house in case somebody had an accident. So I was trying to describe Al's show, Alakazam, to this guy in beige. Billy Connolly always said,
Alakazam in 88, 89?
This would have been later. This was later. This was later.
So
but Al didn't start. God, when William came through, 91 was when I met Al. Pretty sure it was either 90 or 91. Anyway, back to Darling Harbour. You're right. Digress. Don't throw stuff. We're trying to convince the Darling Harbour Authority to take us on. I figured, okay, I'll do a showcase. We'll call it a competition. You can advertise it as a competition. For the day, we will go out and compete with each other. And we drew this huge crowd. Paddy won, actually. And the reason and he hadn't realised at the time, but he drew out an Australian legend who's now no longer an Australian legend, a guy called Rolf Harris, who's now rotting in one of your jails somewhere. But at the time, Rolf was a famous celebrity in Australia. Only Paddy had never seen him before, and Paddy needed the volunteer to do the Zippo trick with, and pulled out Rolf. And Rolf was playing with him, and it just got really, really funny, really funny. And this whole audience couldn't believe that this guy from England had no idea who this guy was. So you had that on top of Paddy being a great performer anyway, the best of times.
I suppose he's got him out and said, "So what's your name?" And this is when everybody thought, like, how do you not know who this is?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I think Rolf invented a name. We put the showcase on, and the authority came down, saw that it was family entertainment, saw that we're a little risque, but that it was, people were enjoying it, and so that was the first time that they started to go, okay, this could work. And then it became, we could use one spot only, and only between certain hours, and at that stage I was in a double act. In 1988, when I came back, after Expo, I went back down to Sydney, started doing solo shows, and Andy Zapp, who'd been doing busking shows in Asia, had just flown in from Taiwan, and we met at the quay and tried to do some stuff together, and suddenly realized, this clicks, this could work. I knew of no juggling duos in Australia at the time. So I thought, wow, that could be something powerful. And we created a kind of a unique show, because half of it was silent and the other half was verbal. And we would constantly swap. And it took us a long time to figure out how to make that work. We could start silent, go full on verbal, go back to silence, and end verbal. And we got it at the end. But it took a while. Every time you would do a dramatic change like that in a street show, you'd lose half your audience instantly. And it took a long time, a while, before we finally managed to figure out how to make them stay there, and how to
And
make
what
them
do you think
realize it.
was the thing you figured out, if you had to condense it a little bit, because I know it's a big, complicated subject?
Size of a crowd for a start. Expectation, building an expectation. We
Is that
would
an
dress.
expectation from the beginning to the
Yeah,
end?
yeah.
So that's
We'd
the
just
get over the
finished.
transition. So you're not having
Yeah,
piece.
and introducing the idea constantly throughout the verbal bit before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just one skit. This is just one part of a long show. We're going to be doing something amazing silently in a moment, and then we've got a seriously great fiery finale. Hang around for that. Let's face it, where else are you going to go? And all of that. So building that expectation up during the verbals, and then doing a very fast change, where as soon as and now for something completely different, bang, the music would hit, and instantly they would think, wow, what's that? The P gun thing, the outer noise thing. It starts very floaty. We use that to change costumes, and then going through a serious whole mind thing that would end up with a slow motion race. Before and when we'd finish that, straight into a juggling 6 torches around a willing volunteer.
Which is your big finish.
That's a big finish, yeah. Well, six flying torches around a guy standing in the middle. Yeah, that's probably not legal anymore.
Depends where, depends what insurance.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking this? Do you like performing on your own?
Do I? Am I?
Do you like
Am I right?
because I kind of get this sense that you've naturally gravitated towards being a double act in the majority of your career that you described so far.
Yeah, I'm in bands now. I've accompanied singers, so I enjoy sharing. I mean, part of that's the clown thing at the beginning, because clowning is very seldomly done alone. Most clown sketches, most clown acts and circuses are the white face and the buffoon. That concept of black and white, which in a way which we use for Zip and Zap to a degree. Yeah, I enjoy playing with somebody. I also, I've done a lot of solo shows over the years as well, but there is a joy and there is an energy that you can do with two people. That's really, every time you're doing a show by yourself, you have to breathe. So there comes a point where you belt out this energy and you have to stop to suck in more energy so you can push out more. Now, in a good double act, the moment you stop, he or she is there. And instantly, you never get this drop in energy that you would in a normal show. You just get a constant momentum that climbs and climbs and climbs. And if you do it well, you start slowly and you're building up to this huge, fiery, verbal or physical crescendo where you're literally at each other's throats, and yet you start off some. So you get this huge build, which is you can do it as a solo act with an audience, and that's instantly what if you're out there in the middle of a street show, you're relating to two things: the people around you, in front of you, and the things that you're doing, your props. They're your instant two things, smaller things, the environment, the weather, whatever, the noises that happen, but instantly, mainly, you're firing it at them or involving them, and to give them a break involving this, whatever this is, be it a juggling club or a torch or an ice cream, whatever. I got it.
So did you and Andy say you create something special? So did you stay on the pitch you developed it on, or did you go touring? Did you try and sell it as a piece?
Oh yeah, we worked as a double act for 10 years. We did movies. We won awards. We toured Supported people like Shirley MacLaine, Alexei Sale, people of that nature. You go into a theatre and go on a stage to the gods and all the rest of it. And you did a lot of universities, got sponsored to fly around Australia by university, by student travel.
And was this experience different from your other experiences of touring? Because you toured all your life up until this point. Is there some contrast now when you form the show?
With Andy, it became a bit more rock and roll, as you would when you're starting to. For one, I mean, it was a golden age of street theatre, and so needless to say, people were very generous at that stage because it was new to them. There was a huge novelty thing to it. So you were the first street show they were seeing. And at the end of that, if you'd blown them away and it was a good show, they would give you whatever they could. In the early 90s, Lucky Rich, before he was the world's most tattooed man, Andy and I did a festival in Tasmania. And at the end of it, we wanted to see a bit of Tasmania. So we got told, go to Hobart, the biggest town, go to Salamanca Place, do a show. Well, we hired a car, drove down, got there, and it was empty. And by some miracle, Lucky got on his high bike, rode around, stopped traffic. I've done mimicry for a long time. So I did a heap of mimicry. And he walked into every pub and cafe. We just basically dragged people out. And we got this huge crowd. It was like a 2-hour show. And we did a combined thing where Andy and I threw torches with Lucky on the unicycle in the middle. And I got all the apple on me. As he was eating the apple there, it fell all over me while I was juggling. There was comedy there. It was funny. And at the end of it, this old lady walked out with $100 bill. And instantly as she walked up, that was a lot of money in Australia in those days. And instantly as she walked up, I realized that this is probably a pensioner. This is probably someone who cannot afford to throw $100 into a hat for 3 performers. So Lucky and I were playing this sort of like, come on, lady, closer, closer. And I was going, no, you don't have to. It's really good of you. We love the gesture, but honestly, that's a lot of money. And no, she just kept coming, and she's going, I really want to give this to you guys. You have touched me in a way I don't know how. And I think that's ultimately the key. No matter how we look at it, what we do, or how we say, or what clever line, or how big a crowd, ultimately it's about touching people. And if you touch people in a strong way, they will want a touch of that. They will want to give you something back. It's just human. It's our DNA. It's what we are as human beings. Most of us. There's a few assholes out there, but most of us, if we witness something that brought us to tears, or that made us laugh and roll over all over the ground, we will want to give something back in return for that experience, and it's second nature. Yeah.
So this experience with Andy, the tour, seems amazing. Why stop?
It's like all things, double acts. The only one I know that's still going is Michiel and Jean-Michel, the Flying Dutchman, and kudos to them, because there's a 4-year period. That's the first danger signs when you look at all the double acts. The first ones disappear after 4 years together. Then they manage to hold it together and last about to 8 or 9, and that's where we did, because it is a marriage. Because I'm me.
And so
I may be really nice right now, but if you were living with me for 5 years, in and out of hotels, trains, planes, automobiles, putting up with my moods, I'm putting up with yours. In the end, it starts to grate. It is a marriage, and yet there's no sex. At least not in our case.
You're in a sexless marriage.
Yeah, you're and also when you throw yourself out to and be vulnerable with someone else all the time, and if he's in a bad mood and suddenly there's a reliance on the other guy or the other person to be there with you. If you're flying and he's like, oh fuck, this show sucks, I'm just walking through the motions for this one, and you're like, oh, it's going really well. There's all of that. There's so many different factors involved.
And was it amicable when you guys went your own way?
Oh, totally. Yeah, he's a brother. You share so much. You share so much that there's a wealth of great times.
And so, what did you do after then?
I think one of the great times for Andy and I was when we figured out Australia, and then we took it to Europe. Him being a Londoner, he was a Londoner from Wandsworth. So all of a sudden we got to do Covent Garden. And the early morning, 5:30 a.m. rise to get on a bus. One of us, it's the beauty of a double act. One can sleep in, the other can get up and do the draw, or put your name down so that eventually you can do the draw later. Because that was the summer ritual then. Edinburgh, I never really killed it, conquered Pompidou. So when I turned up in France with Andy, went down to Beaubourg. At that stage, we knew we had a really powerful show. And the guys who were staying there, who were working there, were going, oh, we're all off to a festival in Saintes. Get you in easy. The train leaves tomorrow in Paris at this platform. Come and join us. So we went and did this amazing French festival. And all my friends from the French friends had never, from them, their memories of me was Dom, the guy learning his craft, trying to figure it out, but never really going boom, and then when it came to our turn, there was a big cathedral on the first day of the festival, and we, for some reason, we got prime time, and Andy and I went out, and it was our first show ever in France, in French. So he did his in English, and I did my half in French, and I would and so that was a novel thing. But the audience just grew, because we've been working Australia. Australia is such a powerful training ground. More on that later. So anyway, we're doing this powerful show, and the audience just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it got to the point where they start pulling all the tables from the nearby cafe. Because you've got them all seated on the ground, 10 deep, and then you've got 10 deep around standing. And then all of a sudden I see a third level go up because they'd grabbed all the tables and chairs from the nearby cafe and they were standing on those. So all of a sudden it's huge. And I'm looking at my Pompidou friends who are watching, and their mouths just like, this is Dom. Wow. Where did you learn this? And at the end of it, I'd crack a whip, freeze, nobody move. That was the final bottle line. And of course, in France, didn't know that then. That was our first show in France. Found out many years afterwards that the French freaked out by whips. You crack a whip in France, and it's like a gunshot going off, and the noise, just like Then they've never seen these things. They don't know. I mean, for us down here, it's a part and parcel of our history, but over there not. So I crack the whip, and the whole third layer collapses, and all I could hear is people. Yeah, they all jump up because of the sound of the whip, and then as they land, all the tables and chairs collapse, and they all, all I'm seeing is people crashing down and people screaming, and and broken furniture and I'm yelling out, "Are you okay? Is everybody all right?" And there's just this madness as everybody's running over, and we, we made a phenomenal amount of money that night. Couldn't believe it, like in my memory of what a hat was worth at Pompidou. All of a sudden, we were like 10 times that. It was like, it was phenomenal. And then the cafe owner came over. Yep.
Can I ask you very quickly? The whip crack, nobody move. Was that yours? Was that something? Did you see someone else do that? I know it's a difficult question, but that's quite a common thing to be done now. And I am always interested in where these things come from.
I'd never seen, or don't recall anybody ever seeing it. I'm going to give you a concept that helps explain this. Back in New Zealand, when I was learning how to juggle, I figured out that the torches, where you catch one, blow it out, put it there, grab the next one, and all of a sudden these two, it relights. That whole interplay of blowing out a torch and then relighting it like a clown, I came up with a paddock in New Zealand. I get to San Francisco, and every juggler is doing that with his torches. And I'm devastated, going, how did they figure that out? How did they know? I invented this in a paddock, you know. And then I realized that there's a thing called the collective unconscious. That's my definition of it. Where we can all come up with similar concepts globally, all at the same time, more or less. I'll give you another example. When I was in a band when I was 18, 19, and I wrote a beautiful song, had a great, compelling riff. Pink Floyd put out their latest album, I Wish You Were Here. Everybody says, gather around, we'll all light the joints and listen to this momentum, this new album. So we listen to it, and it's all really spacey, and everybody's enjoying it. And suddenly, my riff comes blasting through the speaker, da 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 da, and I'm going, how? That was mine. I wrote that on the instrument. And again, it's like a lot of us come up with stuff all the time, and someone's coming up with something virtually the same somewhere else, more or less, at that time. So,
synchronous inspiration.
Yeah, maybe someone at Pompidou or at Covent had a whip and went, stop, nobody moved. You know, who knows?
A lot of the people we interview, I do try and talk about Covent a little bit because it's a place where I didn't learn how to perform there, but I really became the performer I am there. You know, it's a place dear to my heart. What was your experience?
It's the beacon of England. There are loads of places in England which are great to Bath, Bristol, you know, to name but two. But Covent is it's the Wembley of our world. You know, it's huge. It's awe-inspiring when you go out there for the first time. It's like, wow.
Did you feel a little overpowered by the myth of the place?
Oh yeah, partly, yeah. And you know, and everybody had heard of us because word flies in the street community. So when we got to England with Andy, you know, already other performers had been to Australia, done summers, and come back and went talking. Oh yeah, there's a new act, Dom and Andy, Zip and Zap. They're really good, man. Big show, you know. So when we got there, everybody was, oh yeah, you're the all this stuff. So there was all that to deal with. Plus,
so you got love.
Yeah, you got yeah, you got love. Yeah. So yeah, you're having to fit in within all of that. I do remember it fondly though. I used to start shows in Maori in Covent. We had a fire similar kind of. Well, both William and I got it. William Lee and I got it from the same. We're inspired by the same performer who was a Pompidou performer. His name was Kim. He was Korean. He was 6'6", and he had the whole demeanor of a warrior, lean, you know. And he would dress up in virtually what was like a Korean warrior outfit. And his way of gathering a crowd at Pompidou was really unusual. He would slowly dress and nobody would really notice. People would walk past. And then he would face with his back to the piazza, to the rising cobbles, facing the building, build up his energy, and then let out this almighty scream, like a guttural cry, like a soul on fire, you know, ah! And it would go on for about a minute. And everybody would freeze because it was loud and it was powerful. And look, and he would turn around in slow motion and pull something very small, which was a 5-franc coin, out of his pocket and hold it up and then slowly walk out to the center of his pitch, kneel, pull another one out. And by this time, because it was small, he'd stop them with the sound And then they see this dynamic character, but the dynamic character is doing something very small, and they want to see what that is. So they're drawn to it. They want to see what it is. He's got their attention. So they wander down and they start to stop. And very slowly he would balance one 5 franc coin, size of a 50p coin, on another, and just, and he'd be holding 2 coins balanced on top of each other. And then one would start to turn. And as soon as by the time he got to that point, normally there'd be about 20 or 30 people gathered. And then he would form them. And he would form them by running in a square. He wasn't into circles. He wanted a square. But, and that became part of this crowd gather. But again, that concept of something loud, something powerful, to something small. And Andy and I kind of adopted a similar concept with the soaking of our fire torches. We would go out and we would start the show, the crowd pull, after I'd done mimicry, or if I couldn't do mimicry, because some pictures you couldn't. Covent, for example, not a lot of it, unless you were Pepe and you were happy to play with everything, but there wasn't a lot of walkthrough.
So, well, the thing with Covent is you have all those columns, don't you? The columns make it very problematic.
Yeah, and people gather around the columns. So the sight lines for mimicry, it's not actually, it's a miracle that Melvin and Pepe did it there for so many years, because it's not the greatest spot for it. But anyway, I would walk out, and instead of the loud yell that Kim did, I did a Māori whai kōrero, which is karakia, which is a welcome to the marae when one tribe comes to another tribe. The woman would come out and go, "Hai ara mai kankare tai ara tawe tawe." And I did that, but a male version, quite powerfully, and crack whips. Crack whips, in unison, a lot. Crack, 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 crack. Do the karakia, kneel down, do the torch soaking, which had a comedy routine to it, because he would pass me one, and and it would hit me in the face and all that sort of stuff. And by that time, there was enough interest in 2 crazy characters, the whips, the weird language, and now they're soaking fire. Ooh. And then you could draw it. We did some really nice shows in Covent. I got really fond memories of Covent. It was a wonderful community. I cannot, there's a few crazy characters there, as there always are. I mean, essentially, we're all one huge dysfunctional family. We've got our crazy uncles and our, bipolar cousins and all the rest of it. But it was a lovely piece of history, and to have photos that you looking back years later and go, wow. We did the other end of the piazzas on Sundays as well. That was nice, away from the main one, but on the other side of the building. Yeah.
That's now a musician's pitch.
Is that really? Wow. Okay. Yeah.
There was a deal made, I think, in the 90s, where the musicians, instead of everyone queuing up together, they would take the East Piazza, and the performers would take the West Piazza.
Okay. They used to be on the side, kind of where Dr. Stewart and occasionally Silver would do shows as well. When you're facing the Punch and Judy on the left-hand side.
Yeah. And so did people kind of say where they wanted then? It seemed like it's quite a free environment for people to work in an area which worked for them.
At Covent?
Yeah.
There was the queue. There was the main spot. Everybody worked for that. There's this huge gutter in the middle of it, or a third of the way down. And that's instantly like it's a demarcation, and it's such a strong one that it becomes an instant line. People come up to that but don't want to go further. And so it takes a while to be able to crack them, to get them beyond that point to come closer. Yeah.
And so how long did you stay in Covent for? Did you just travel through, or?
We did 6-8 weeks. Okay. And then went up to Edinburgh.
And what was Edinburgh like?
We did the Mound. In those days, the Royal Mile. This was 91. 1 year we did it with the Florists. We were essentially the two big shows at the top there. The Florists were possibly the best street show I've ever seen. That combination of Mark, John, David Southern, and Sean, that was phenomenal. We went through, we kept running into each other in Europe all the time. We did Avignon together, the Fringe Festival. They were.
Just go on with. I've heard stories in the Mound, in the Edinburgh Fringe, because there's fences around the galleries now. But I believe that when you were there wasn't. It was all an open space. Am I correct?
It was one giant piazza. You could drive in, literally. In fact, the mayor's wife drove in once while Pepe was doing a huge show, and he milked that to its most. But there was an entrance on the road going up the hill, and you had two circles. Essentially, you could get two circles side by side. The one between the two buildings, not facing down towards the jungle, was always the harder one because there was less people on that side, and everybody could see the one straight up the top of the jungle. People were also using, I think Williams started that, I think, although I could be wrong, the grass behind the art gallery on the steps that go up to the top.
There's a whole pride, isn't there, about moving your crowd to the grass? Yeah. It seemed like it was a very capable crowdsmith, that you could take an audience to a different place.
Well, William had that New York thing, so he was. That's possibly one of the toughest places to work on the world. So for him, Edinburgh was no problem.
So the columns. Who was the first person to climb the columns? Because there's been lots of talk within our community about who started it, who was the first person, what went on with it.
Sam and Andy in my head. I've seen Rex do it. Rex Boyd did it quite a few times. But to me, it was always Andy's trick and Sam and Andy. It took some serious acrobatic skill to be able to inch your way up with your feet holding 3 burning torches going up there.
It's a death drop when you're at the top there. It's about 50 feet, isn't it? Something
easily. If you slip and you're doing it in those shoes, in standard brogues. That was definitely worth every dime every pound they got for that. That was an amazing trick, very hard one to beat. Yeah. And then there was a lot of noise. There was one summer there, the Peruvians were right on the Chilean bands. That was the invasion of Europe at the time. They were everywhere. They were all over the Paris underground. They were all over the London underground. Every festival you went to, I'd heard that there was from sharing accommodation with the Chilean with one group in Bern 1 year, that there was a safe house where they would fly them in from France, give them the costumes, the CDs, the instruments, and just send them out. And this is your pitch. You're going, for the next month, you're working Amsterdam. This is where you go. This is the guy who'll look after you there. This is the guy who'll look after you in England, and all the rest of it. So it was a far cry from the romantic, we are singing for our country that is starving and please help us scenario they were putting up.
Well, what's interesting in this is it seems very similar to the contemporary floating Yoda statues, which you've probably seen. Maybe they've found the way.
No, not that. Not in this part. Not as yet. Although I'm in a small little town, so yeah.
Maybe it's not found the way over. But what it is basically, it's a metal platform, and then there's a metal pole that comes up, another metal pole that comes like this to a body harness, and someone sits down in this, and they hold onto the pole as if it's a cane, and it looks like they're floating. Yep. Very simple to make. Takes no skill to perform because you're just sitting down and you wear a mask, most of the guys, so you don't even have to facially perform. So what's happened with the Romany community is they figured out this is cheap, easy, it's scalable, we can take it to any country in the world, and we can do that. So now this whole conflict between performers saying, it's a mafia, these guys do this. And my big argument always was, sorry, dropped my lighting, My big argument always was that it's not a bloody mafia. It's just people, organising between each other and doing their thing. And it just sounds quite interesting that there's a wave of that in every city centre in Europe at the moment. At least there was. I don't know if there isn't now, obviously, at this moment. It seems like the Peruvians were the 90s version of that, so to speak.
Yeah, pretty much. I think they were, pretty much. I mean, had to be a bit more organized to the degree of, printing CDs and all the rest of it. Someone actually had to go in the studio and record all the stuff, and these are the songs. The Edinburgh year that I was there, they brought in generators, and suddenly they could crank up PAs, and suddenly that became a pain in the ass. We were just discovering radio mics, but essentially 90% of us were using our voices. That was the first year that I can recall seeing people with radio mics as well. But, we weren't happy with them. We would have huge arguments with them because they would just drown us out.
What year is that with the radio mics?
That would have been 93. Okay.
I remember the first time I ever went to the Mound, and there was a Peruvian band there with a war of speakers, an absolute war of speakers. It must have been about 3 or 4K.
Yeah.
I was lucky that they basically allowed me to do a show because they wanted to take my crowd. So they let me finish, and then they took them over and sold CDs. But if they wanted to, you got no chance, none whatsoever.
No, it was so loud. I lost the plot towards the end. Andy was doing the fire show. He handed me the 3 torches. He used to do a solo juggling fire routine at the beginning. Well, I quietly went in and got everybody in place for the audience, so they could see something rather than just 2 people going closer, closer, closer. I would just quietly move them in. And when he finished, I quietly grabbed his torches and ran through the back of the Peruvians and burnt their, along the back of the legs and the bottom, because I just had enough. We were losing our voices. We were just having to scream over this stuff. And when they got really angry, I just turned around and went, enough, turn it down or it'll get serious. And they actually did for us. I guess they didn't want the crazy Kiwi losing the plot.
Well, I mean, this is me, I think. On the street, you develop conflict resolution skills. You have to.
Yeah.
Because you're in an open environment. No one has the power. Most of us aren't going to call police to come and sort things out for us.
And 9 times out of 10, there's always a positive way of spinning it so that they understand what you're trying to say. And 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to talk yourself out. But it got to a point where after 3 weeks of constantness, and we'd all gone over John Feely's an amazing guy at that sort of stuff, to try and get him to talk. No, come on, look, voices, all this stuff. It just drove us nutty. And in the end, it just seemed unfair. You can turn up with a generator. Yeah.
Well, this is always the thought I had: is you win if we're gonna have shows that are competing. You win because you're better than me, not because you've got a bigger sound system than me.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you win because you're better, fair game. I have to go home and practice. But I don't want to think you won. I better go home and buy a bigger speaker, because what that means.
No. That's always what used to bug me about chainsaws, because they were the easiest crowd gather. At one stage, for a while, when I was doing solo shows, I had a recording of a chainsaw that I would just turn on, on the tape deck, and just kick the bag. You just and watch people stop and then just go, stupid people. It's not going to happen. It doesn't exist. It's just me seeing how stupid people are. Keep walking. Because people would just stick them on the ground and inspire, let this thing ramble around, and it defeats the art. The art is to use your skill, your talent as a performer, be it silently, via mimicry, verbally, via your voice, and your character and your talent, or whatever skill you want to use to actually go, I exist, I'm really good, you're going to have a good time, come on up. And some people go, I'll put the machine there. That'll do it. Yeah. I don't know if they allow them anymore.
They're still around. It's harder to use them. I went through a little period using them and I got rid of them because I think they make you lazy. They make you less a good entertainer because you rely on that to do the work for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened after '93 then?
We came back. We didn't tour so much after that. Not Europe so much. We got heavily involved in the campus circuit. We kept doing street shows galore. It was a golden period for Australia because there was no restriction. And by that stage, I'd opened up Darling Harbour. I had the Sydney City Council on side, and I'd opened up the Opera House for select times, the forecourt. And I was starting to get feelers from events I'd created a very loose collective anarchic thing called Street Biz. Essentially, I figured that if we could have a united front, rather than just me as an individual talking to the powers that be or to a festival organizer, but to say, it's not just me, I'm a part of a thing called Street Biz. Look at all these marvelous acts. They're all a part of this. And it's, that was simply, it never existed in a legal capacity. It didn't have a board of directors or meetings or minutes of stuff or a secretary or treasurer or any of that stuff. It was just a loose thing called Street Biz. And people started to hear about it, and performers would send stuff to Dom, Street Biz. Hey, can you get me a gig in Australia, sort of thing. And more, because Australian customs were all way cool. They weren't being problematic. If you could walk in with a high unicycle, and, oh, that's cute, mate. I'd love to see that in the outback or whatever, and make a joke out of it. But you got in. You weren't like, oh, are you here to work, or what are you doing? Are you going to be busking? None of that. It was at that stage. And so that made the pitches really enjoyable because there was a high turnover of acts. Pitches get stale. If you have the same 5 acts all the time, they start to sound like each other. That's the first thing. That's what San Francisco taught me. San Francisco was a very tight group. They closed it down, essentially. They would allow, the odd person to come in who was a friend, like Nick, for example. When Nick went to San Francisco, he knew Dana really well, and Dana went to the draw. Yeah, and Dana went to the draw and went, hey, this guy's from England. He's really good. Let's give him a couple of shows. Who's got one free they don't want to do? And Fred, he can do my 3 o'clock one on Sunday if he likes. I've got a gig. So Nick got a couple of spots, but essentially to get in and live and be part of that circle, year in, year out, and pay mortgages and stuff. No, that was a closed world. When I saw that, I figured it's a mistake, because instantly you become virtually clones of each other. There's a defensive thing. As soon as as soon as you're uncomfortable or you lose the energy when you're performing, you instantly start to dig, oh, what can I say? Something's happened. I've been thrown off my oddball. I'm off my norm. I'm not on autopilot anymore. This has just happened. What do I do? What do I react? And in a nanosecond, you flip through your head, and whatever you heard the other guy 2 days ago say in a similar situation, you go, that'll do. And all this takes a fraction of a nanosecond, and you come out with his line or a version of his line. And you see the reaction it gets, and you go, wow, maybe I'll just leave that in. And suddenly, material becomes common, and more importantly, the verbal patter becomes quite similar, or variations on a theme. I won't rip it off. I will talk about elephants rather than the cat, in that line. And all of a sudden, and after a while, time marches on, and it becomes such a part of your act that you go, this is me now. This is mine. I made this. The classic example, and not in our world, but I can use this on a grand scale, 1, because he's dead, and 2, because it's true, was Robin Williams. Robin Williams, as a stand-up, was a sponge. He just loved everything. That was the way he was. It was his personality. That was his DNA. He would go into a stand-up club and soak it all up. And 4 or 5 days later, on the Dick Carson show or whatever, the Johnny Carson show or whatever, he'd come out with a line unconsciously going because he'd heard it somewhere and he needed something at that point because he was always at 100 miles an hour, and out it would pop. And suddenly that performer who might have spent hours writing that particular sketch or material or line suddenly was hearing it on national television going, oh shit, no one's ever going to believe I wrote that now because he's just gone and said it on TV. And
Oh, I
so
heard it
consequently,
you had to pay people off quite regularly for it.
yeah, or performers would refuse to perform. He'd walk into stand-up venues, and performers would just go, "No, I'm not. If he's in the room, I'm not going on." And it was never malicious. They just realised that was the kind of guy he was. He would just.
It's important that Robin was a street performer when he began. Do you think that's
Yeah.
led that nature of acquisition of bits? Because we are a grabby group, you know.
Yeah, and many of us. I mean, not only Robert De Niro did the street to pay for his acting classes in New York. Steve Martin. There was. Yeah. And closer to home, the great success of Eddie Izzard for you guys. I mean, that's huge. And when you think of how many people actually did street and did Covenant and then moved on to, and whereas other people, I mean, I loved the freedom of the street, even though I had an agency and a personal, and Andy and I had a manager, and obviously you don't get to support Alex E. Sale and people like that without someone in there going, hello, this is how it works. I just loved the freedom of the street. To me, it was, I mean, it suits the anarchist in me, the fact that you can, in its ideal form, you can just walk out into a crowded place with your gift, your dream, and go, this is me, enjoy. And at the end, if you did enjoy, give me something in return, please. And just to do that, it's just so simple and pure. And of course, it gets dilated, and you have to do draws, and it's become complicated, and there's distractions, or the weather turns up, or something's been parked on a pitch, or it's never as simple as that. But just the ideal was just, and still is, such a marvelous thing. Which is why I fear of its freedom for its future, because as the world becomes more and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and morality changes, the stuff that I said in the streets, the whole verbal mimicry scenario, lovely dress, madam, amazing what you can do with curtains. Now, when I said it to somebody in the street in the 90s, people would see that it wasn't an attack on her as a woman. It was a general observation, me commenting on what I was seeing. And I wasn't going, lovely dress, Mrs. Smith. I was going, madam, you, whatever. It wasn't said maliciously. It wasn't an attack. It was simply a joke. But now, because mainly...
They're meant to be laughing at you, not her. The
Exactly.
fact that you say, oh, I love what you did with the curtains, it's kind of inferring you're an idiot, because they're obviously not curtains, and you're a bit stupid, and so they're laughing at you.
Yep. There's that side as well. But now with the growth of phones, all of a sudden we have changed from a crowd in the 90s was we are one, to a crowd and now at Covent Garden is me, not we. People no longer think as a crowd, they think of themselves because of this square box they have. That is everything, The amount of photos we've seen with performers standing in front of stages, oh, here I am, the amount of times people are interacting with a rock and roll show through a phone rather than through themselves. The loss of that and the change in political correctness and all the rest of it means that we have to be twice as edgy. You cannot touch children in the street now. I rode with a kid on a unicycle on my shoulders for years. He was happy to be there. It was funny. I mean, I was risking if I fell, sure, he could have fallen too. And luckily I never had an accident. It was a certain amount of risk, but nobody went running up, you're not.
practiced for a huge amount of time, and you did something where the risks were mitigated to the point where it was beyond unlikely, I'd
Yeah,
argue.
yeah. Me too. But all of a sudden, public liability, insurance, it's
Did
now
that
with the
affect the showbiz? Did that affect that as it came in? Because you must have, being kind of like a facilitator or booker, you must have seen the dynamics
oh
change.
yeah, yeah. It became, it was like a huge storm. We get thunder. I mean, you probably get them in England too, but we get massive
Headphones, I'm
thunderstorms
listening.
here.
I'm just going to go get a glass of water.
Yeah, yeah. We get massive storms in this part of the world. They're like black fronts, Armageddon coming, and the public liability issue was a massive storm like that. Um, we saw it coming way before it hit. We knew that it was coming. The Duck for Cover Collective was started by street performers, a group of people in Melbourne who decided the only way we can afford to do this is if we all are under the one banner, rather than I'm getting it for me and you're getting it for you and he's getting it for him. If we all do it under the one as the one group, then we stand a chance of being able to afford this ridiculous, humongous thing. The fact that it closed down so many events, so many festivals, so many, yeah, it was monstrous. All of a sudden, you had to have a piece of paper that, if someone trips over your guitar case, yeah, they could rebuild the entire shopping center with what they sue you for. It became seriously crazy, and events disappeared. All the smaller stuff, all the if you're running an event, a small folk festival, and you're on a break even percentage, and then suddenly out of the blue comes a bill for you know a third of your budget, to pay for the off chance that someone might fall over. Um, and yet there have been times where I was really glad, I could see the need, because performers have accidents, and when they do, it's horrible. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
and when people get hurt, you want to be able to do right by them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly,
So,
exactly.
are you running street biz till now to this day? Was there a
No, no, no.
project?
Um, it kind of stopped when I left Sydney. I figured that I ran when I found this little fishing village where I live, surfing town. Um, I'd just done my last tour of Canada. It was 2004. We jumped a few years. I'd already been running quite a few events in the past. I had that CV, resume, and experience, and I had that thought going, the world has changed to such a degree that it's going to get harder and harder. I'm getting older. Do I want to keep saying if this is the point now where I can do a change for myself? Or do I want to dedicate myself to repeating this material or variations of it for the remaining years? And I chose to try something completely different. But before that point, I suddenly realized I could bring all my friends here. Why not find sponsors? There's going to be just as much a thrill if I can get a good crowd, five performers here on a weekend to crowds that hadn't seen street theatre in this valley, in this part of the world. They'll love it. And they did. And, the first year, we had 5,000 people come. It was a 2-day event. The third year, we had 18,000 people. The town's got a population of 6. So that makes a huge impact. I still get people coming up to me in the supermarket all the time. I loved your festivals, mate. Loved them, loved them. I wish they were on again. People remember stuff like that. So in a way, it introduced me to my community and put a big stamp of this guy did this. Wow. And so consequently, when I needed audiences for shows, when I started going to the musical side of things, people knew who I was, and I had a good time at the events that I'd run in the past, and were happy to take a gamble and go, it's a Wednesday night, let's go.
And so how did that go then? So was it a jarring movement from performance, through circle performance, variety performance to music, or was it comfortable? Did it seem like the right time?
It felt like the right time. It didn't happen instantly. Um, took me a while. First of all, I had to create the sound, create the look, create the music, because essentially, it's sadly it's falling apart now. But for the way a street musician makes his income is through the sale of his music. Um, that was the big, you have money in a hat, but the big return is when people are buying, a CD for $20 and you sell 200 of them. That starts to add up. If that's a possibility in that kind of world. So yeah, it didn't happen instantly, but I was lucky to the sense that I knew I wanted to do it outside, and I knew that I would have to come up with a sound. And and it's a never-ending quest. But to me, the joy of doing it is to find a kind of a sound that will stop people, and it doesn't stop every single person, but you can see someone, you hear it, and you can see it instantly resonate within them. Because I don't sing,
Was
I
this
play
something?
instrumental music,
Yeah.
so
Was this
it's
something you
purely
got from the first
notes,
day?
sound.
Did you
Mhm.
figure this out? Did you figure this out from the first day? So before you went on the street to play
I kind of,
music, you'd
well, there were pioneers
already had
before
it.
me, and I'd
Did you
seen them.
already have a kind
Um,
of realising the ground?
yeah, I'd seen Estas, I'd seen Tupan, Trent, who probably is unknown, but Estas and Tupan were the two big ones, and Lindsay Buckland. They were the three who draw circle acts shows, who crowds. When they go out with music, it's not to passing traffic. They build crowds, big ones. I think Tupan still has the record for the most amount of CDs sold in the Pitt Street Mall in Sydney on one Saturday morning. It's, people just fell in love with that, and I realized that he does it completely differently to me. You put Tupan's music on and mine, and they're worlds apart. But yet this, and I sit, he stands. Yeah, I think, well, one thing we have in common is we both use the same brand instruments. They're both Godin multi-acts. But again, what I learned from him is that connection. If you can play a tune that, even if people don't know it, but it reaches within the heart, and it stops people, and people just stop and want to go, I'm entranced by this sound, I want to hear more. They will sit, they will listen, and they will keep listening, and they will keep listening, to the degree that eventually they'll get up and they'll want to buy a CD. And that was the goal, just like originally in the early days of the street, where it was like, okay, I need to build a crowd, and then I need to build an edge, and then I need to build behind the edge, and then I need to, to get them all to come up at the end and pop something in the hat. It's the parameters were different, but the exercise was similar. And I'm in a small part of the world, so I don't have the availability of thousands of people walking through a street. So markets were the big one for me. There are large markets in this part of the world where you can turn up, and 2 to 5 thousand people are going to walk through it in an hour. So set up, find a good spot where it works, where it's not going to bother stall holders. You can get to a certain volume and it's comfortable for everybody, and go. Uh, and many musicians have done relatively well from that. The world is changing again. People CD players are becoming a thing of the past, much like VCRs have become a thing of the past. So I imagine I'll be using COVID once COVID clears and all the rest of it. It'll be scraps of paper. Go to the website.
Like QR code kind of things on them.
Yeah, or download cards. Just push into this code. You can automatically download it on your phone, on your computer, and you have 5 chances to download it, and then that's it, sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, I had the thought of having a USB key. You could sell a USB key, but I think that's even archaic in itself now.
Yeah, yeah. Technology is moving so quickly. People were doing that about 2 or 3 years ago. That was working as a concept. So it's not a bad idea at all. And performers have sold stuff. I mean, Nick was selling DVDs. He's not the only one. People have had DVDs of their shows that they to raise that extra bar. Everybody's happy putting a $5 or a $10 in. But if you put 20 in, you get a DVD as well. That's an enticement.
Chap you mentioned earlier, Alakazam, is one of the people I think who's got in the stories I've heard one of the largest hats ever collected in Europe from one show, and I think that was one of the major contributors was being at an amazing festival. I think it was the World Buskers competition in Ireland.
Yeah, in Dublin. Yeah,
in Dublin, and also selling of DVDs. Once you've got that thing of there's a reciprocal exchange, people feel a lot happier. Putting an extra, doubling the price they put in, or quadrupling it. From 5 you get 20, from 10 you get 20.
What's keeping the music world alive? For the big acts, the Santanas of the world, is the merch. You go and play at a festival, you get a fee, of course, but you're hoping to hell that the merch tent's going to run out of T-shirts and beer cozies and underwear, and as well as the CDs and all the rest of it. It's the sale of the image. But yeah, it's worked in our world as well.
And so, do you see yourself being a street musician when you're old and wizened, and you're getting someone taking you by the arm to the pitch, or
who knows? Maybe if we're still allowed to go out into a public space and play, yeah, why not? It's a lot less physically intensive than the street show days, and yet there's a different a level of concentration and a level of skill, and plus the carrying of gear. I mean, I think Robert Nelson, he was when before he passed away, he was seriously thinking of stopping, and the reason was that he wasn't sick of doing shows. He was just sick of lugging this 100 kilos of stuff to do the shows through airports and into taxis and up and down stairs and motels and hotels. And it's just, we carry so much.
Envy the mime.
Yeah, envy the mime indeed. Yeah, I'm not all of us. Paddy and his little suitcase. Yeah.
2 lighters.
2 lighters, can of Zippo fluid, and an envelope. Brilliance. And then acrobats.
Acrobats the same. Dom, we've done, I think we're on 2.5 hours, coming up to the 3rd hour nearly now.
Bloody hell.
I'm going to have to, I've had such a pleasure talking to you, Dom. I really have. It's been an absolute joy. Everyone knows I was ill last week and I've been a bit poorly, and I've had, a difficult time with me health, and it was such a pleasure, and it is such a pleasure sitting chatting with you. Really, genuinely, mate, so much. We can talk for another 20 minutes. I'm sure is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we close up?
Didn't realize we'd talk for that long. Wow, time flies. Time flies when you're having fun. Seriously, if you're listening to this, or if you watch it weeks later, come on, it's fun. Matt's doing a wonderful thing for our community. He's keeping our knowledge alive, and it's knowledge. It can disappear as next generations come in. When we get stuff like pandemics, that can set back an industry like ours quite severely. So this is one way of keeping our world alive. This is one way of keeping our ideas floating. If we inspire each other, we come up with new things. Because ultimately, that's what we need to do. We need to inspire. Things can be remarkable out there. There were people who specialized in making people cry in the street. Have you seen shows that make you cry? The finale.
Not yet. I mean, I've been desperate for it. I've had people turn around to me. It's 2 things. Can I just give you the context of this? It's really interesting. People told me 2 things about the street. One, they said you can't do art on the street. which I very disagree with. And the other thing he said is that you have to make people happy on the street. You can't put them in another place. And I disagree with that. And so I'm really interested to hear this.
There were two amazing mimes during my time at Pompidou who also went to Expo and continued to tour the world until one of them, sadly, whilst doing a solo show at the Edmonton Street Festival, died of a heart attack in the middle of his show. But before he did that, his name was Wayne Kondo. He was a good friend, and he worked with his partner Nanny as they learnt the mime skills in France, and they developed two amazing characters. He was in a karate outfit. He was a small little bald man with wisps of hair at the back, and he was a great mimic. And he would run around playing with people to gather a crowd, while she remained frozen like a statue, dressed in a beautiful doll-like costume, all aqua, all in makeup, both of them. And she would hold this pose. Then when Wayne felt he had enough of a crowd, through laughter, enjoyment, people were having fun with him, he would bring them in. He'd made friends with them at that stage. And then he'd bring Nanny alive as a doll. And he was the master manipulator. And he'd turn on some Vangelis, and all of a sudden, the doll, kind of like Frankenstein in a way, would come to life. And all of a sudden it went up from simply a funny man running around making us laugh to, oh, this is becoming theater now. This is becoming narration. And they would build the relationship to such a degree that in the end, she would break away from him and want her own freedom and fixate on a volunteer, which he would instantly come on, we'll fight each other. And she would turn on him for daring to hassle her friend, and kill him. And at the end of it, she would stand there with her one foot. He would be lying on the ground. She would strangle him to death. And he would be lying on the ground with her foot on his chest and her hand in the air going, I am free of the manipulator. And people would be crying. 80% of the audience had tears flowing in the crowd. It's remarkable. And people would be crying when they went up. I'm crying. My eyes are welling up just thinking about it. And people would. It was astonishing. It's the first time I've ever seen people moved to tears in a public space by a circle act, not by a grand extravaganza like La Fura del Baus or Royal Deluxe or any of the large, huge street theatre companies who put on incredible shows, by the way. But by two mimes, and granted, it wasn't foolproof every time. Sometimes you never got the magic to be that powerful. Just like some shows.
I suppose you've got to get the focus for that, right?
Complete focus, and that's all we hope for, because we live for the moment where we do those shows that are beyond the norm. Every year we will do 300-400 shows, whatever. And, 70-80% of them will be fun. 20 or 30% of them will be terrible shit. It rained, the pitch was bad, the dog came in and destroyed it, whatever. And then there are those 3 or maybe even 1 or 2 shows where they go beyond. And suddenly you sense that this huge crowd of people watching you don't care who you are, what you're doing, but you've both entered, another place together. It's really hard to describe. We get into metaphysical terms and all the rest of it. It's kind of like a car crash where everything happens in slow motion, and suddenly, you seem to be connected to all these people, and they are connected to you. And it's gone beyond simply, I am juggling 3 torches and I'm about to do one behind my back, or whatever's happening at that time. It goes beyond that, and it's such a rush that when you have it, you want it again. It transcends every experience we ever have as performers. It's there, and it's so powerful. It's like jumping out of an airplane, or surfing. But those things last for a split second, or a minute at the most. Whereas you have this ability to create something that is that powerful, and that will hold people that strongly.
Well, this is the thing, and you talk now about you're unsure what's going to come in the future because of the quarantine and the pandemic. I personally believe, and I've said this in a number of interviews to people, that we have a responsibility now to create those moments in public, to make sure it doesn't take, like it seems to have from the 1918 pandemic and the world wars we had in the last 100 years, that it doesn't take all the way up to this, 60s and 70s and 80s for this culture to come back out into the public places. We need it back in the first few years, and that we're the people who will be in the squares trying to do that.
That's our task. That's our goal. We have to reanimate the world. We have to remind the world that we're human, that we can stand next to each other, that we can hug each other, that we can play with each other, that we can be with each other and enjoy each other. Because without it, it's I think the hardest thing about the whole thing is the whole social distancing thing. We're used to constantly, whether it's just walking into your local pub and going hello at night, or buying your bread from the same guy every day and having that conversation, whatever it is, that's simple, or talking to complete strangers on a bus, whatever. If all that's taken away from you, and the amount of people who are
shaking somebody's hand, the warmth you get when you hold your hand out to somebody, to shake their hand or to hug, hold them, something which we, in caring for others, aren't doing at this moment.
Yeah, we need to remind, we need to remind humanity, and few things can do it. Music can to a degree, cinema can to a degree, but because we're live, we're there. We've broken that fourth wall, which cinema traditionally and the theatre does to a degree.
The thing is, there's no wall on the street. That's one of the joys of the street.
That's the joy of it. That's the power of it. It's like you, and that takes people a time to realize that, both performer and both audience. This is immediate, and some people push that crystallinum. When you get did you ever read Bim Mason's book? Bim Mason was a circus teacher, circus skills theatre teacher in Bristol, in one of the circus schools there, and he wrote a book with street theatre, I think. He analysed it. He wrote, this is the different kinds of street theatre you have, and these are the different kind of shows you have. And the first one was the entertainer, someone going out and making them laugh. Check it out, juggling shows, whatever. My aim is simply to entertain you, and at the end, I hope you enjoyed the show. Leave me some money. The second one he called the animator, which is what the mimes do, because they push it beyond us. They push beyond the entertainment level, because it involves people on a theatrical way. You have to tap in to what's going on, really focus with what's going on, rather than simply be watching it from a distance going, oh, look, he's juggling 3 clubs. You get caught in the drama of it. It becomes far more theatrical than just simply entertainment. And the third one he called the provocateurs, and he used Leo Bassi as a great example. Leo would do really crazy stuff. One of his most notorious feats, he was hired for a festival in Italy, and he woke up that morning. I wasn't there. I'm paraphrasing a story that was told to me by someone who was there, and also what I read in the theatre magazine afterwards. But he read in the morning while he was having his breakfast that there was going to be a flyover, military planes by the bucket load at 12:30, and he had an 11:30 show. And he went, okay. And he went out, and for an hour, he got a huge crowd, and he preached the end of the world. He went, this is it. I know I've got the inside info. The button's been pushed. The world is coming to an end. We are all going to die. We need to get out fast. And everybody was laughing at him. A clown, funny man, funny man. But listening too, then because he pushed it to such a degree that many of them were going, hello, is this possibly happening or not? What does he know that we don't know? And then after an hour of hyping people up to all of this is Italy. Italians are easily hyped. Suddenly the planes come over. And suddenly all these people go, oh my God, he's right. It's the end of the world. And they run back to their homes and they pack their bags and they drive out. And there's chaos on freeways, all because a single street performer went out there and went, there's a military flyover. I can use that. I'll preach the end of the world. See how many people I get to run out. You know, it's
yeah. And you know, if you're going to be pretentious and clever about it, you've got people to look at those objects in the way they should be seen. Yeah. They're weapons of war. Yeah. People should be concerned by.
Exactly. You know, and you can use the power we have to entertain in so many different ways. Yeah. Chris was like that too. People watch Chris's shows through enjoyment, but the unpredictability was such that many of them were riveted in fear, going, if I move, he will see me move and he will fixate on me. I mean, I saw it in Switzerland, so Swiss audiences weren't half as adaptable as a Covent Garden crowd, but it was stunning to watch, you know, because it was using the theatrical energy that we can create in an outdoor show completely differently, you know, with no regard for the environment or any props, you know. Taking a kid's shoe going, oh, you know, I can see your future. There's a swimming pool in it. And then throwing the shoe 300 yards away, you know, so that the kid has to run for it and stuff like that. No, it may sound crass or crazy now, but it was done to I don't know, to push boundaries, to make, so I've done this to you. What's your reaction? Where do we go now? Pepe used to have a touch of that as well. Kino, for a while in Australia.
Let me play the monster kind of thing.
Yeah. Kino had a theory. He would start a show for a while in Australia where the first third was complete. It was really nice, beautiful entertainment. And audiences would go, oh, we love you. You're lovely. And then slowly he'd turn into the devil. And at the end, I'd walk past around the back of his shows at Manly and people would go, ordinary Australian surfers and blokes would go, I'm going to thump that bloke when he's over. He's fucking mad. And then, you know, and eventually, and he'd wind it to such a degree that if any more, and they would go crazy. And then if he managed to, because sometimes it would just disintegrate there, people couldn't handle that, he would go back to being the nice guy again. And at the end, you're not making money that way, but you are pushing theatrical boundaries way beyond what is simply, hello, I'm going to eat the apple while I juggle. You know, it's like we don't always have to simply, you know. We told the news once.
Sorry, carry on.
When you look at the origins of moving of vagabond theatre, and the times of Molière, the Commedia dell'arte in Italy. In those days, no television, no media, no newspapers. If you were living in, say, Milano, and you had cousins in Napoli, and there was a plague going through the land, like we have right now, how did you know? How could you find out whether Napoli was all right or whether it had gone to the dogs? You couldn't ask soldiers; they would beat the crap out of you. You couldn't ask priests because they were the other people moving out, because they would excommunicate you, or you couldn't touch them. You'd ask traveling musicians, traveling performers, what's going on in other places, because that's the only way you could find out short of going there yourself. And that's how all those forms of theatre, you know, our role was telling the news. Our role was to play with the news, to make fun of the news, which is why Commedia dell'arte developed, because it was criticizing the church to such a degree that they had to suddenly go mime or lose their heads, you know, literally. So all that, and that role's kind of been taken away from us. So maybe at the end of the pandemic, That's our role again, to make people forget the news, forget the constant media wash that we're getting, and come back to simple, being, human, being out there with people and watching something that warms the cockles of your heart. That's what we're after. That's what we're after. Yeah.
Dom, what a beautiful moment. I think we can end it here. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Dom,
Pleasure, mate.
thank you so much. Really a pleasure. Everyone.
Mine too.
Last thing you would say goodbye.
You're doing a wonderful thing. Keep it happening.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Still no idea when this ends. It's going to